sweet dreams are made of this.
I feel like I have changed dimensions or come to a parallel universe. 2 days ago, after having dinner and going to sleep, I wake up early morning and look outside my bedroom window. The buildings, which I could see from my room, seemed to have changed their positions, as if they got shifted from what they once used to be. And there is a subtle difference now in the surroundings. There is also a huge parabolic satellite antenna on my neighbor's rooftop, which was not there before, but it doesn't look like it has been installed new. Rather, it looks old and worn out, with pieces falling apart. I felt very light and was as if something had changed dramatically, but I had no energy to resist a change. It took me an hour to come to senses and start getting ready for work, as I could not accept the fact that something as major as this had happened. I tried checking my phone calls and emails to see if it's the same, and it looks the same. But then, I also don't have a perfect memory. What if everything is not the same, and I am not in the same world? There are subtle changes like this which have been eating me away for the last 2 days. I am also worried that if something like this has truly happened, then what about the world I was living in? What happened to me over there? If I left that place, then who is there in my place? Or have I completely left it and no longer exist? What about the people around me, my friends and family? What happened to them? Until now, I had only considered these things as fantasy and make-believe stuff shown in the movies for entertainment. But after that day, I feel different. I feel weird. My family used to contact me every day regardless of whether some event was there or not. But since the last 2 days, they have not contacted me. I messaged, and I got a small response, which was weird, considering how talkative they are. I don't think things are the same, even though they look like it. I can still see the changed position of the buildings from my window, and it looks like they have always been like this. My roommate says that I have been speaking loudly and getting up at night while sleeping, which has never happened before. Or maybe I'm tired of working so much, and it has taken a toll on me. I don't know. I just tell that to myself to convince myself that everything is fine. Thank you for listening to this. I just wanted to let it out, as there was nobody to talk about stuff like this. I have thought for the last 2 years that this event was a Mandela effect, but after finding this sub, I'm starting to think maybe it was a glitch. I'm hesitant to tell this story. No one believes it, even my husband who saw the whole thing. But here we go. My neighbors directly across the street from me. They're married and expecting a baby. The wife is a tiny blonde woman, very Caucasian, very tiny build. We wave to each other daily and yell salutations across the street. She goes into labor and they leave for the hospital. A week later, I see the car has returned, so I bake some cookies and take them over and congratulate them. Another day or 2 goes by and I see a thick, brunette lady outside with a baby, and I wave, assuming it's a relative that's come to help with the newborn. A few more days pass and I see the husband outside with the brunette and the baby. So I take the cookies over. It's her. It's the wife. Same name, same personality, and the same demeanor, except she's now a thick, kinda tall, brunette Pacific Islander. The husband doesn't acknowledge any difference. She talks to me and treats me the way she always has, but it's totally a different person. My husband noticed as well. We made some jokes about him wife swapping at the hospital, but since he can't wrap his brain around it, he starts to believe that she's always been this person, even though he clearly remembers her, teeny and blonde. I feel like everyone has lost their minds. It's been almost 2 years since that shift, and she's still a thick, tall brunette, and then I feel like maybe I've lost my mind. My only consolation is that my husband remembers it too, if only vaguely. Update 1. So I showed the picture I found of her to my husband last night. He's a little bit of a mess about it. The man is not a conspiracy guy at all, but he remembered her. He started asking some questions and tossing around ideas about what could have happened. I convinced him to go to the church this morning and attend their service. I spoke briefly with the pastor and said my neighbor had recommended that I attend. He was grateful she was sending people his way, even though, get this, she hadn't attended since she had the baby. She apparently changed churches to one a little closer when she gave birth. So, I don't know where to go next except for putting some feelers out in the neighborhood and finding an excuse to hang out with her. Update 2. I didn't want to update until I had spoken directly to my neighbor, so I endured the heat all week and spent way too much on flowers to plant in an attempt to run into my neighbors. The old lady next door doesn't remember the neighbor's wife having blonde hair, but her middle-aged daughter does. She said, "Yeah, that was a couple of years ago." I don't know why she went so dark. I thought it would wash her out. When I pointed out that it wouldn't wash her out because her complexion is tan now, she looked confused and said that maybe she had been tanning because she did look darker. I pushed it a little further and asked if she also seemed taller, but she seemed stuck on the fact that the very Caucasian blonde woman had gotten tan enough for such dark hair to look natural. She gave me several reasons, but didn't seem convinced either. I also spoke to the changed lady's next-door neighbor and mentioned her having blonde hair. Neither he nor his wife remember her ever being blonde. They both agreed she had dark hair on move-in day. Yesterday I finally cornered changed neighbor lady outside. She pulled up with groceries and I offered to help carry them with her. I started talking about the church and how I had spoken with the pastor. She said some really nice stuff about the church, also that she needed a church closer. That's why she'd switched. When I pointed out that her new church was actually further away, she said she had never actually measured it, but it seemed closer. I pointed out that her old church was in our town, and her new church is in the next town over. And she said the back roads must make it seem shorter. Some red flags popped up here because the back roads around here are long, windy roads that circle around our town and pass by all the farmland. It doesn't ever make things quicker. It's a nicer drive, sure, but it always adds a good chunk to the drive time. Also, the new church is in the middle of the town, 2 streets over from Main Street, so if you take the back roads, you actually have to circle back to get on the main roads to get to it anyway. It would be much more convenient to take a direct route using the town roads that connect the 2 towns. It's almost a straight shot from the middle of our town to the next town over. I don't know why that bothered me, but it did. After a little while of small talk, I brought up the hair. I said that I was trying to go blonde to hide some grey that I have coming in. And did she have any tips? She laughed and said the last time she was blonde, she was in high school, and that was a mess, so she wouldn't recommend it. I pointed out that she was blonde right before having her baby, and she got really weird, almost offensive, and said she hadn't. She had only tried to go blonde that one time in high school, and it turned orange, so she dyed it back immediately. I told her I chalked it up to pregnancy brain because she was definitely blonde while she was pregnant. She ended the conversation shortly after, and thanked me for my help, but you could tell she was annoyed with me. So, guys, not super sure what I learned, other than the girl next door to me, the old lady's daughter, and I are going to have another chat. She made me feel like she remembered, but she couldn't wrap her head around it. I'm going back to the church on Sunday to poke around and talk to some more people. Anyone else have something so blatant happen? Two weeks ago, my father passed away unexpectedly. I believe I have fallen into another universe since then. I meet with a close friend weekly to work on a creative project together. We meet at the same restaurant each week, Before my father died, the restaurant had a wall lined with jars of Caesar dressing and vodka sauce. I know this because I specifically examined the jars the week before my dad's death and pointed out the calorie content of the vodka sauce. In an attempt to regain some normalcy, I met with my friend the week after. The walls were now lined with Caesar dressing and tomato basil soup. This would be innocuous enough if I hadn't specifically examined the jars the week before. I spoke with the staff and they informed me they have never sold vodka sauce and have always sold the tomato soup. I feel the shock of my father's passing caused me to shift into a parallel reality. Am I crazy? Around 2003 or 2004, I worked as a projectionist in a movie theater in Middletown, Connecticut. As a projectionist, back when actual 35mm film was loaded into projectors, before theaters went all digital, generally after you started the last show of the evening, there wasn't very much else for you to do until the film ends. So often I'd go downstairs to help the other staff clean up, talk, eat leftover popcorn, and just generally goof off. One evening we decided to buy a Super Bowl from one of the vending machines in the small arcade in the lobby. In case you don't know exactly what a Super Bowl is, it's a small rubbery ball, maybe about 3 centimeters in diameter. If you throw them against a wall or something, they just seem to bounce around the room forever. So, we took the ball and decided we'd try to throw it as hard as we could against the floor to see if we could make it hit the ceiling of the lobby, which was quite high. Attempting this was indeed a challenge. You had to really slam the ball against the floor to have any chance of reaching the ceiling, and we could never seem to quite hit it. Close, but not quite. But we weren't giving up so easily. We became determined to prove this was possible. Now, the floor of the lobby was a hard tile floor, so just as you'd expect, this Super Bowl would bounce off the floor and launch really high into the air. That's basic physics, right? Who would ever expect a different result? Well, on my next attempt of bouncing this ball up to the ceiling, physics apparently didn't apply. I took the ball in my hand as usual and slammed it as hard as I could against the floor, and the ball, for lack of a better explanation, stopped dead when it hit the floor. It just froze. Not even the slightest hint of a bounce. It hit the floor and seemed to stick to it, and very slowly roll away, as if all inertia and force were just sucked right out of it. This was witnessed by 3 or 4 other employees, and every one of us just kind of stared at the ball slowly rolling away in disbelief. How was this possible, we wondered? Super Bowls don't do that. We got the ball and tried again, and again and again. The ball hit the floor and flew up high in the air every time we tried bouncing it, as physics would normally dictate. Just for that one time, physics refused to work as expected. Reality seemingly glitched out for a second. This was a mystery, and we explored lots of ideas for how this could have happened. I mentioned the floor was tile, so I thought maybe the ball hit a gap in the tiles in just the right way to make this impossible throw happen. The tiles are about 30 centimeters square with a small gap of grout between them. But there's no way that the ball hitting the gap could explain it. If anything, it would have just made the ball bounce up at an angle or something. We checked the tiles. Was there anything unusual about them? Loose, maybe? No, not loose. Was there some sticky dried cola residue on them? It was a movie theater lobby after all. Nope. Tiles were clean and dry. How about the ball? Did it have some spot that was softer or something? No, that wasn't it. Even years later, when I recall the incident, I tried to think of any logical explanation that could have caused the ball's odd behavior that evening. I have never been able to come up with a reasonable explanation. Super Bowls simply don't do that. Manny, shortened from Manouche, was my first full-time dog, a rescued 2-year-old American Staffordshire Black Labrador mix that went through hell before he landed in our home. The pound staff said he came into their care with a shoelace or string around his neck so tight he could barely breathe. He was severely underweight and also had a very pronounced scar along his back that belied much more violence plagued him in his short life. What the staff deliberately failed to mention was that he had heartworm, demodectic mange, secondary bacterial dermatitis, and tertiary yeast infection on his skin and in his ears. I don't note all of this for the sake of pity porn, but to note this boy had been through a lot, and I know firsthand, when you make it past the cusp of death alive and well, you have access to certain abilities, talents if you will. I have a whole suite of stories to share about our experiences, good and bad, but for brevity's sake, I'll tell this one account, since it's the one another human and 2 other dogs witnessed. Manny was 7 or 8 at this point, and he was, for all intents and purposes, my familiar and a trusted homeboy that took damn good care of his property and would not try to escape even if the gates were open. Seriously, we once got back from a day out to find Manny sitting on the front porch with a shit-eating grin on his face, gates wide open. Any other of our dogs would have fannied off after the first cat, squirrel, or noise that caught their interest. Anyway, it was a Saturday, and my partner and I were out to lunch and shopping and whatnot. I had recently purchased fresh beef bones for all 3 of ours, a dainty venison shank for my youngest 10-month-old girl, a big 8-inch beef shank for Manny, and a giant femur bone for my partner's girl / my goddaughter, Rachel. Now, one of Manny's quirks was that he was profoundly orally fixated. Since he would shred and eviscerate and eat any stuffed animal we got him, beef bones became the one thing he could work with, and would generally carry one around with him most of his life. He accepts his new baby excitedly, but promptly noticed that Rachel was getting a much bigger bone than him. I saw him give her his signature frozen glare while she dug into it in her kennel, which her dad securely latched shut before we left. Manny didn't budge. Think the Rottweiler from The Omen. And I laughed at him and half-jokingly asked my partner, "Want to bet he has Rachel's bone by the time we get back?" My partner, Ben, snorted and said, "No way that thing can fit through any of the kennel gaps." I shrugged and gave Manny an encouraging pat on the head, told my girl, Rue, short for Ruxana, goodbye, and we were off. The time out was blandly pleasant, I guess, because I couldn't remember much other than wandering through a couple of stores and having lunch I paid for. We roll up the driveway, make it to the door, and hear the characteristic clicks, sniffs, and shuffles excited dogs produce when their humans return home. Always a good thing. It's when you hit dead silence that you need to worry. We enter, and sure as shit, death and taxes. There's Manny waving around Rachel's mega bone in his mouth, basically gloating and showing off to Dad. Ben just gaped, while I swooned with pride and congratulated Manny. Ben rushed over to Rachel's kennel in the bedroom, and it was as he left it, securely latched, with no obvious means of passing a giant bone like that through it. I was hugging and cackling for a good 3 minutes, with Manny soaking it up enthusiastically. No way he would give it up now, so we quietly slipped Rachel his shank, which she bitterly accepted. So what happened? We had no indoor cameras, so no one but Manny or Rachel can say for sure. And Manny departed our mortal plane in early March 2020, just before the pandemic kicked the planet in the taint. He's buried in our front yard, and I swear, he's still guarding us well. There have been times during 2020 and 2021 where I heard him growl or bark, and I'm the only one hearing it. Zero reaction from my living dogs. I would look out toward his grave and see random homeless or drug addicts trespassing up the driveway, looking for delivered packages or a place to piss or God knows what. Of course, I promptly would scream them off the property and give a silent prayer and thanks to Manny. He'll make a fine psycho pomp for me when my time comes. I apologize if this doesn't make sense, but I'm freaked out and have no idea how to explain this. My co-worker and I were driving back from dinner to the place we were staying at. We had driven this route a handful of times and were very familiar with the surrounding area. It was a 7-minute drive from the restaurant to where we were staying. Okay, so we left the restaurant and had a straight drive for about 2 miles, no turns, until we had to take a right turn into the parking area of the property we were staying at. As we approached the hotel, the tall Courtyard by Marriott sign was visible, as was the building. We were a block away from the turn, and then we just suddenly weren't. We were all of a sudden driving on a highway, about to take the exit on the right. It was immediately apparent, and I said to my coworker, "Wait, something is wrong here." And he replied, "Yeah, what the hell just happened? We were just about to turn into the parking area." I told him to pull over, and I looked up on the maps where we were. The map showed we were 20 minutes away, in the opposite direction we had come from. It was physically impossible, and the time on the clock was still the same as it was when we were next to the hotel. I don't understand, and neither does he, and he doesn't want to tell anyone because it sounds so crazy. We teleported 20 minutes away. It was the single, most disorienting feeling I've ever experienced. But now after that, I feel like everyone in my life has just changed. Everyone feels so distant. I can't shake the feeling that something is still really very off. Please help. When I was 19, I worked at Walmart in a festival town. I was a cart pusher, and in the summer the store would get overrun with festival goers. On this week, many years ago, there was a hippie music festival going on. The venue was very large, and the population of this small Midwestern town would swell by several thousand people. I remember that I was walking away from the store to gather shopping carts, donned in my blue vest of honor, and there were 2 or 3 young women about my age walking towards the store to enter. They were obviously festival goers, and all donned out in their hippie-esque regalia. I saw this blonde girl from about 20 feet away, and something about her just struck me with a massively intense feeling of familiarity. We began to walk slowly past one another, and we locked eyes and could not stop looking at one another. Then she stopped, pulled away from her friends, walked up to me and said, "I know you. Where do I know you?" I told her I was experiencing the exact same feeling. We stood there for 20 minutes while her friends became impatient and tried to recall past towns we had both lived in, or people who we both might mutually know. But nothing in our histories lined up, like, not whatsoever in the least. She was from a different state entirely. There was no crossover whatsoever. Eventually we gave up and went our separate ways. I was a far less confident and socially awkward man then, and I should have gotten her Facebook or number, but I did not. I'm 34 now, and I still think about her all the time and wonder very deeply about who the hell she was, or how we could have felt so strongly about one another, with no apparent connection. Okay, so I go to the grocery store around 6ish to pick up food for the week. I use the self-checkout and I'm walking straight towards the automatic doors to leave, and a couple walks in. The girl catches my eye because she has a very detailed tattoo of a dragon on her thigh. I admire the tattoo for a second, just as she slightly stumbles on the floor mat, which causes her glasses to fall off her face and onto the floor. She bends down to pick them up and proceeds past me. I get home, cook my meals, which takes an hour or so. I go into my bathroom and my cat has knocked over my toothbrush, which is now being chewed by my dog. I have no extras, so I hop back into my car to go back to the grocery store for a toothbrush. It is around 8ish. I grab the toothbrush, but this time I have to go to a regular register because the self-checkout is closed. My route to the doors is different this time. I have to walk down an aisle in front of the registers and the doors are to my right. Just as I'm getting to the door, the exact same couple walk in. The dragon tattoo is a dead giveaway. The girl then stumbles on the floor mat, drops her glasses, and kneels down to pick them up. No expression, nothing. I felt so confused. I got back in my car and just thought of the sheer amount of coincidences that just happened. I see this couple once. The girl drops her glasses and picks them up. My dog just so happens to chew my toothbrush, causing me to come back to the grocery store hours later. Somehow this couple not only needed to come back to the store, but do so at the exact time as me where we met, in the exact place and manner. I just now have a different point of view. Then the cherry on top, the girl stumbles and drops her glasses. Again. Shit was weird. This is something I experienced shortly before moving out of one of my teenage homes a couple of years ago. When I was around 13 or 14 years old, my great-grandmother used to collect dolls. One of the dolls I took a particular liking to because of how goddamn creepy it looked. She picked up on it and actually gave it to me not too long before she passed away. Fast forward to the story at hand. My two stepbrothers and I were sitting in the living room, chatting late at night, around 1 a.m. or so. For context, this is a cookie cutter house, so when you walk in you basically have to choose between going upstairs or downstairs. The living room is directly upstairs from the front door. There is a fireplace on the left-hand wall, but not much else to note since it was an open concept. Adjacent to the wall, there was the railing overlooking the doorway area, and in front of the railing is the couch. There's also a television sitting on the ground on the wall opposite the couch. During our conversation, we got into the topic of childhood paranormal experiences. Joking around, I went and grabbed the doll from my bedroom and leaned it up on the shelf above the fireplace. I made sure when I put the doll up there that it was leaning securely, so as not to slip off. Some things that are now important. The television is on, but just the no signal screen. And because we were preparing to move, there are boxes and trash bags filled in front of the fireplace, at least 3 to 5 feet out. We were all sitting on the couch at the time this happens. In the middle of the story, my younger stepbrother was telling about an experience he had in the basement of a childhood home. The doll was flung forward from the shelf, landing a good few feet away from the boxes, meaning it flew a good 6 to 8 feet away from the fireplace. At the exact same time the doll made contact with the ground, the television shut itself off and turned itself back on. We've never had any electrical issues in that house or with that TV. Needless to say, we about pissed ourselves. I know people are going to say it's possible that the doll had just fallen, but the doll flew forward off the shelf, even though it was leaning backwards. And things that fall don't typically fall outwards several feet. Let me know what you all think. So when I was 7 to 9, I don't remember what age I was, I had this doll that was about as tall as a German Shepherd. This doll had a voice box where if you pressed it, the doll would laugh and giggle for about 30 seconds. This voice box was placed in a pocket in the back of the doll's dress. Eventually I got annoyed with the voice box due to it going off a lot. Before this incident I had thought that some stuff behind it was pressing it, or that the pocket was sewn on too tightly, so it was pressing the box when there was no pressure on the pocket. So as I said, I got annoyed at the box, so I had emptied out a drawer and placed the box in the drawer. I had closed the drawer carefully so as not to move the box in the slightest. After this I went to sleep. At maybe midnight, I had woken up to the sound of the box coming from the doll. I had made sure to place the doll on the opposite side of the room from the drawer the box was in. Forgetting for a minute that I had taken the box out of the doll, I tried to get back to sleep. About 5 minutes later, I remembered where I put the box and got up to open the drawer. It was still there, exactly where I had left it. A few weeks later, I got rid of the doll. However, for a few years after that, I could still hear the laughter of the doll's voice box. I only remembered this incident when I had found one of my porcelain dolls on the kitchen counter. My mum had moved it for some reason. This happened about 10 years ago when I was in secondary school. That year, I was in the morning session. Since my school was in Queenstown, I stayed in Jurong. I have to leave the house quite early to catch the 7 a.m. bus. Normally, I would get up at 6 a.m. to get ready for school. The night before the incident, my sister and I had difficulty sleeping. We share the same bedroom. It was a very warm night, so since my father was working the night shift, we went to sleep in my mother's air-conditioned room. I still could not sleep, so at 5:30 a.m., I decided to take a bath and get ready for school. I took my bath in my mother's bathroom and then went up to my room to get ready. I was combing my hair when I heard somebody calling me, "Kakao, Kakao," sister in Malay. I turned around thinking my sister had woken up, but there was no one around. I went to my mother's room and found my sister still asleep. I grew scared but brushed it off as my imagination. I went to the room again to get my school bag and, again, heard it. This time I heard a small child's voice calling me, "Kakao, Kakao." I turned and saw my sister's doll, the one that cries when you took out the pacifier, and its eyes actually blinked at me. I immediately ran to my mum's room and stayed there until 6:45 a.m. Once I reached home from school, I took the doll and threw it in the storeroom, and since then, I had banned all dolls from my room. So, I'm going to share something with you that happened to me as a child. At the time, I was around 10 or 11, and my sister would have been 8 or 9. Long story short, our cousins who we saw every weekend had purchased a life-sized knitted clown from an op shop or thrift store. I know what you are thinking. Why on earth would anyone buy one of those? My thoughts exactly. Anyway, from the moment this clown arrived at their place, weird things started to happen. I'll give you a couple of examples. They would place the clown in their bedroom, for example, and when they woke up, it would be sitting on the couch or in the kitchen, and this went on for some time. One night, a few months after they got the clown, myself and my sister had a sleepover at our cousin's place. By this point, we were all super scared of the clown and didn't want it to be anywhere near us. So for whatever reason, we locked it in the outdoor dog kennels that they had at their place. Sure enough, when we woke up the next morning, she was inside the house, sitting on the couch. Although all our parents were skeptical, our uncle, our cousin's father, decided it would be best to just get rid of the clown for good. He put the clown on the back of his ute, ready to take a load of rubbish to the tip that afternoon. This is the part I really can't explain. Myself, my sister, and our 2 cousins were all out the back of their place riding on the mini 4-wheelers they had, and we stopped to have a break and chat. Then out of literally nowhere, we see the clown running like it's human through the long grass maybe 50 meters away from us. Terrified was an understatement. After 10 seconds, it had disappeared into the long grass. We ran to our parents and tried to explain what we saw, when everyone realized the clown wasn't on the back of our uncle's ute anymore. No one could understand, especially us 4 kids after seeing what we saw. That was the last time we ever saw the clown. We went back to the long grass where we saw it, but nothing was there. We talk about it still to this day, and honestly, still can't believe it. This story sounds like a load of bullshit, I know. But we know what we saw that day, and it's something I'll never get out of my head. I suppose the underlying question is, where did the clown go? And what had caused this to happen? This story happened to me during the lunar 7th month, some 5 years ago. I went over to my then ex's house for dinner at about 6 p.m. After dinner, I was bored enough to actually play with my ex's niece, nephews, and a bunch of other kids who were aged around 5 to 8 years old in one of the bedrooms. I was watching the kids play when suddenly the 5-year-old niece, Crystal, tripped over this English baby doll. One of the ones with blinking eyes, eyelashes, ultra creepy kind. Crystal started crying, and like most Chinese parents who hit whatever hurt their precious little child, I picked up the doll and started spanking its bottom repeatedly. It worked, and her niece started giggling, so I put the doll down on the ground and went to the living room to watch TV. Suddenly, my ex's older sister, Brenda, came out from an adjacent room, asking which kid was the little prankster who tapped her from behind several times. Upon hearing the commotion, I asked her what happened. She explained that she was in the bedroom adjacent to the kids' room where the door was left ajar and the lights were turned off because her fiancé was taking a nap. With nothing to do, she was gazing at the mall opposite from their flat through the window when someone tapped her lower back from behind. The first time she ignored it and brushed it off as one of the kids playing a prank on her. The second time, she turned around and, from the corner of her eye, caught a glimpse of a half-naked kid dashing out from her room. Thinking that the kids were trying to play with her, she looked for them in the other room and was puzzled to find all of them were fully clothed. She was certain of what she saw, but came out of the room puzzled. Who exactly was that little kid who was half naked? Brenda immediately related this incident to her aunt, who then sought the help from a bomo over the phone. This is where the creepy part begins. The bomo told her aunt to enter the children's room and look under the bed. He then insisted that she will find a doll there. Furthermore, he managed to give her one more feature for identification: the color of the doll's eyes, which were blue. I accompanied their aunt to the room and retrieved the doll, and to my astonishment, it was the doll that I spanked earlier. At that time, many questions raced through my head. How did the bomo know that there was a doll under the bed? How did the bomo also know the color of the doll's eyes? Why did the kid not look for me instead, since I was the one who spanked the doll? The bomo immediately instructed their aunt to leave the doll under a tree in the estate's park, and we did. After this incident, we went out for supper and came back to find the doll already taken from the tree. Some more questions popped out. Who in their right frame of mind would dare pick up such dolls during the night of a lunar 7th month? My mum always emphasized never to pick things up during the 7th month because they may be dirty. I kept quiet about the doll spanking incident for fear of getting a scolding from my ex. Of all the questions that went through my head that night, only one was answered by another medium who was a friend of my mum. She claimed that I was sort of untouchable by dirty stuff because I have a pair of really thick eyebrows. Glad I have them. Recently I've been reading some other stories in this sub, and I was reminded of something that happened a while ago. Once a year, my parents go on vacation together somewhere in the US, usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog and like for me to check on my nana who lives in our basement. Normal, right? There's another important bit of background information. My dad takes part in this weird golfing competition with his friends where if someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll as a sort of trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's some running gag. Well, my dad won the competition and he brought it home before he left. I am not at all scared of dolls. In fact, before he left, I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye and a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it and didn't really bother to ask. November rolls around and my parents leave for their vacation. Everything goes normal for a little while, but then things start to get weird. Because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll on my sister's bed, who is in university, and took a picture to send to her as a joke. She hates dolls, so I leave the room with the doll still in there and head into my room just to send the photo and move on with my life. A few minutes later, I hear a massive bang. I jump, startled, and go to look out into the hallway. My sister's room has slammed shut. Now, our hallway has no opening windows, and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful. A little on edge, I open her door and see the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was weird, but brought the doll back into my room and moved on. That night, I'm sleeping normally in my parents' room. I have to sleep in there while my parents are away because I need to keep an eye on my dog, and she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night, which is odd. I usually sleep all the way through the night. I check the time and see it's around 3 a.m. This immediately freaks me out because I read that it's the witching hour. I glanced over at my dog and she's awake too with her head up. Also strange. I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee, but she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look to the closet too and see that it's open, even though I remember shutting it before going to bed. I quickly turn on the lamp and get out of bed to close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. My teenage brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder. So I get back into bed, scroll on my phone a bit until I fall asleep. I wake up the next morning as usual to feed my dog, but when I go out into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door when I'm not in it. Now, it's still dark out because I have to feed my dog around 6 a.m. or she throws a fit. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor. I left it on my bed. I remembered last night and am now feeling paranoid. But again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave, deciding to just have my door open. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep a couple of extra hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound, loud enough to wake me up, the heaviest sleeper in my family. I quickly got up and ran downstairs, my first thought being maybe my nana had fallen in the basement and was banging for me to help her. But when I got downstairs, I realized the banging was coming from my balcony door. I saw the glass shaking, as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud, it was shaking the counters. The strangest part is that my dog was just standing in front of the door staring at it. And she's the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely still outside. No wind at all. I text my parents and tell them what's going on. As soon as I do, the banging stops. They tell me it's probably nothing and not to worry about it. I went downstairs to see my nana, but she had no idea about what happened. She's almost completely deaf, so couldn't hear it. She can't even walk up the stairs, so there was no way of her causing any of this. That was the last weird incident that occurred. The next week, my parents got back. I didn't tell them everything that happened because I didn't want them to think I'm a chicken or something. Needless to say, I moved that doll out of my room until my dad brought it back to his golf team. Nothing strange happened after that. I still have no idea what went on during those couple of days. but it certainly was strange. I sort of wonder the story behind the doll now. This story is about a haunted doll. This particular doll was about the size and weight of a young toddler, and its name was William. My grandmother bought William at a flea market in the mid-1970s. He was dirty, naked and torn, but she saw something about him that she liked, so she bought him anyway. She brought the doll home, cleaned it up, bought toddler-sized clothes for it to wear, named it, and sat it in the rocker in her parlor. Once or twice a year, grandmother would buy William a new outfit to wear and give him another good cleaning. Then back to the rocker he would go. William sat there for years. William always scared me when I was a kid. Not only did I have a mannequin phobia to deal with, but William himself was strange looking. He was a very lifelike doll, but on his face he wore an expression that struck me as much too aware and knowing to belong to a child of the age William was supposed to be. Rather than as a toy child, I regarded William as an adult in miniature, and not a particularly nice adult at that. To me, when I was 10, William looked like he knew where I slept, and wanted me to know that he knew. If garlic had been a deterrent for dolls instead of vampires, my room would have smelled like pizza. But William never visited me while I was growing up, and he never gave any indication that he was anything other than a big doll with a strange expression. Until my grandmother passed away, and William went to live with my Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Nelson. Lorraine's kids, Michelle and David, were 11 and 9 respectively, just about the age I had been when I first encountered William, and their reaction to him was remarkably similar. He made them nervous. Their mother had propped up William on a wingback chair in the living room, and both kids told me that it was eerie to get up at night to use the bathroom and find William dimly illuminated by the hall light, seeming to watch their comings and goings. From his seat, they said, William could clearly see the doors to both of their rooms, doors they began keeping closed at night, so William couldn't watch them sleeping. Even with the door closed, Michelle remembered recently, it was like I could feel him staring at me, waiting for me to come out. Eventually, William stopped waiting. One night, David got up to a sleeping house for a trip to the bathroom and was surprised to find that William wasn't in his usual spot. David was the younger of the two children, but also the more level-headed one. He decided that his mother must have moved the doll after he had gone to bed, maybe to clean it up or dress it in a new set of clothes, as grandmother had done. He finished in the bathroom and returned to bed, neglecting to shut his door. And as he tucked himself back in, his sleepy eyes widened in alarm. There, back in his usual spot, was William. David leapt from his bed and quickly closed and locked his bedroom door. I didn't know where William had been, he said, but I sure didn't want him in my room. A few nights later, Michelle awoke to take a trip to the bathroom. Casting a wary eye at William, she found him in his usual spot on the chair. On entering the bathroom, she noticed that the toilet paper roll was empty, so she returned to the hall, where a new package was in the linen closet just outside the bathroom. Once back in the hall, she yelped in alarm. William was crumpled on the floor, about 4 feet in front of his chair. To me, she said, it looked like William had climbed down, headed for the open door of my room, but stopped when I came out of the bathroom. Michelle ran back into her room and huddled in her bed. The bathroom would wait until morning. She fell into a fitful sleep and woke early with the sun just beginning to stream in through her window. Her need for the bathroom was urgent now, so she hurriedly unlocked and opened the door, and screamed, rousing the rest of her family from their beds, because when she pulled open her door, William fell into the room. He had apparently been leaning against the door, waiting for it to open. Lorraine and Nelson hadn't been oblivious to the goings-on. They couldn't help but notice that their kids had suddenly started locking their doors at night, but they had attributed that to the kids' increasing desire for privacy and the impending rush of puberty. Neither David nor Michelle had mentioned to them their experiences with William, and even though Lorraine had already begun to feel a certain unease about the doll, she never made the connection until the morning Michelle woke her with a scream. But Lorraine had noticed William's inexplicable refusal to stay put weeks earlier. Nearly every day she would have to put William back in his chair at least once, and often several times. She had no idea how the doll could keep tumbling out of its big chair. She wasn't able to knock the doll down without applying enough force to actually fling him from the chair, so she saw no way for him to simply fall out. But fall out he seemed to do, over and over again. One afternoon, a few days before Michelle's morning scream, Lorraine hadn't been feeling well, and so laid down for a brief afternoon nap. She awakened an hour or so later to find William in bed beside her. She was initially quite spooked, but soon deduced that one of the kids who had come home from school while she slept had placed the doll there as a joke. It was only later that she decided otherwise. The day Michelle had her morning encounter with William, Nelson put the doll in the attic. He believed none of what the kids were saying, but agreed to hide the doll away to mollify them, for they were genuinely afraid. He told the story to my mother a few weeks later, and she told him that she'd like to have the doll if Nelson and Lorraine weren't planning to keep it around. Nelson agreed and went to the attic to get it for her, and was unable to find it. Nelson tore the attic apart, but William was gone. That was nearly 10 years ago, and William hasn't turned up again since. I work in an extremely old building. My office is just like a small resource room that's inside the library. The first incident took place a little over a month ago. We were going through a grieving period on campus, and while I had no connection to who had passed, I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps it was them. I was sitting in my office with the lights dimmed, as I usually work better that way. I was so focused on my laptop that when I took a moment to write some notes down and I looked back up, I saw what appeared to be a tall, slouchy figure behind me for a second, and then it suddenly took off. I was so scared and caught off guard because I could see the shadow reflecting on my wall. My desk faces it. I followed it with my eyes as I saw the shadow slowly move on the wall. However, I was too scared to turn around, and I remained in my seat for a moment before I gathered the courage to get my things and leave. I will never forget that feeling. It was as if my blood had run cold and my breath was caught in my throat. I felt frozen and scared to death. The second instance was right before we left for the Christmas break. The same scenario again, where the lights were dimmed and I was heavily focused. Except this time, I didn't feel scared. I looked from my laptop at the wall in front of me for a brief second, and I saw the shadow walk slowly right behind me. It felt different somehow. The energy didn't feel threatening, but just calm. Something overcame me and I simply laughed and said something along the lines of, "Hello there, want some peppermint candy?" And as soon as I said that, it went away. I don't know why I chose to speak to it. It just kind of came out without me thinking. I truly don't know if it was the same entity as the first, but strange nonetheless. That very same day, my sister said she also saw something later that afternoon as she works during the evenings. She and her co-worker were needing a pair of sticky notes, and as my sister sat in one of the chairs in my room, which faced directly to the door entrance, she looked up from her phone briefly and saw what she described to be a tall shadow figure zooming past my door. She thought it was a student at first, but realized that it couldn't have been since they had already been dismissed. The lights in the library were off, and the only light shining was from my office. But she claims to have seen it, clear as day. It freaked her out, but nothing really new to her since she tended to see a lot of shadow people. Anyways, I just felt like sharing this because I've never experienced something like this before. And if anyone has any thoughts as to what this could be, I would appreciate it.
All the guards at my workplace know this theatre is haunted. We're all used to the super eerie feelings down in the lower levels, backstage areas. Most of it can be passed off as long work hour stress. But there is definitely some evil stuff in this building with us. It's probably an entity that's latched itself onto the themes like theatrics and whatnot. I don't know. We've got all kinds of stories. We have all heard the grand piano playing on its own in the night. We've all heard ghostly whispers, arguing every now and then as we walk through the halls. Sometimes I smell a harsh burning in the halls at night, like sulfur. We all know that doesn't mean well. Tonight has been the worst it's ever been. I heard a door slam shut nearby as I was patrolling. As a joke, I yelled out, "Who it be?" Inside joke with me and my friends to lighten my nerves. And I heard a deep, almost unintelligible male voice saying, "It be me." This may sound kinda funny, but I did not enjoy that. My Bluetooth earphones, they blatantly refused to work tonight. I also walked through one of the function halls in darkness. Once the building closes, we patrol without many lights on, other than the occasional safety lights here and there. And I saw something following me in the mirror. I refused to look behind me or stare at that mirror too long, but it appeared to be a figure clearly dressed in a costume of a king, with a big fur robe and a black, jagged crown. Its head was tilting side to side as it shuffled along behind me, kinda like a key-winded toy. It moved so soundlessly, so I was pretty startled. I couldn't feel my legs out of dread, so I didn't even stop walking. I just stopped looking immediately, and I calmly kept walking out of the room, pretending to see nothing. I think this is happening due to the current performance of a really old and famous play called Faust. A very famous actor died performing it here in Melbourne a long time ago in another theatre nearby, and his ghost allegedly haunts that theatre till this day. It's not too far down the road from our theatre. There is also a secret warehouse on site, the location of which, for obvious reasons, we do not share with the public. But this warehouse, it's basically a storage room full of really old and valuable artifacts. Things that have to do with early modern theatre and music. Authentic historical pieces, like 18th century instruments and old chests or trunks that belong to people of fame. One-of-a-kind tapes, recorded by famous rock and blues musicians. Old stage set models, some of them dating all the way back to the 1800s. It's crazy. I know for a fact that some of these old artifacts, they bring with them the presence of beings potentially even older than them. You couldn't pay me enough to open some of these creepy-looking trunks. Safe to say, I'm glad I'm casual now, and I no longer work full-time. I've been working here for almost a year, and it is hands down the most haunting place that I've ever experienced.
I work in investments, Wall Street hours. My building is a classic downtown glass skyscraper, but the floors were remodeled recently. Custom, state-of-the-art technology, coded locked doors, light sensors, the works. Every day I arrive at the office around 5:30 a.m. and am always the first person on the premises. Others drift in around 8 a.m. During COVID, we might have 5 employees total coming to work. Everyone else works remotely. This morning I arrived at my floor and everything was dark as usual. However, as soon as I entered through the coded security door, I heard a loud, female voice talking. Wow, I thought. People are coming back to the office. I was happy to have company. Lights popped on one by one as I advanced down the corridor to my office, and that's when I realized where the voice was coming from. The entire trading floor was black, except for my office, which was fully brightly lit, and the TV was blaring at full volume, behind a locked door. I stopped walking, bewildered, and looked around to see if anyone else was there, and I was alone. Lights on the entire floor were dark except for my office and where I was standing. I went into my office, turned off the TV, and started my day. 5 minutes later, the TV turned on again. I've been in this office for 7 months, and am its first occupant. The motion lights will sometimes activate when I'm alone, but motion lights, who knows? To be honest, I've never imagined an office building being haunted. But this was a very strange start to my day, and I want to see what everyone thinks.
During my time at university, I had a part-time job at a huge Bavarian company. The building, it had 8 floors and a quadratic shape, with a big lobby hall in the center of the building. It actually was hundreds of years old, but completely renovated. I worked once or twice a week, mainly on weekends. Now, here's the interesting part. I worked in night shifts, and my job was basically to walk around the whole building twice a night. While walking through the hallways, I just had to watch out for stuff people forget when they rush into the weekend. Open doors, open windows, or light switches still turned on, that kind of thing. Nothing out of the ordinary, and the pay was good. In fact, I was kind of surprised about how good the pay was, because obviously I didn't have to do much in those 8 hours. My girlfriend and other friends, they mentioned that the pay was just fair, as I had to walk around a huge building at night, completely alone. They always mentioned how they would never do this. Sometimes, my girlfriend visited me there to bring me some meals, as the sinister feeling in buildings like these would play mind games with them. I never had problems with being alone. Neither was I paranoid or believed in paranormal occurrences. I just studied throughout the night and did my 2 walks. Until this one night, in September 2018. The shift started like any other. I got the keys from the janitor and I started studying, after my walk through the building, of course. Between 3:55 a.m. and 4:05 a.m., the entire electronic system throughout the building resets, which I found really odd at my first shift, but I grew to ignore it after some months. The janitor explained the reason after I asked. The reset, it leads to light sources turning on and off throughout the whole building, systematically, but still chaotic. I sat at the front desk, not even paying attention to it, when suddenly, a certain noise reached me. One of the 2 elevated doors in the first floor opened itself, closed itself, and opened itself again. Malfunction, I thought, going back to reading boring science papers. After 20 minutes, it happened again. But this time, the light in the elevator had switched off, which seemed really odd. At this point, I started to feel a little bit alarmed. When I moved into the elevator, the door behind me had closed. I panicked and I tried to get out of the elevator, but the elevator started moving and it took me to the second floor in complete darkness. When I reached the second floor, the door opened and I basically fell out of the elevator door, turning around while I fell. The sinister-looking, completely dark elevator closed again and took off to another floor. My heart was racing, and a part of me thought someone manipulated the console. But another part of me felt something else. Fear. I had goosebumps all over my body and returned to the front desk with the plan to text my supervisor and the janitor about a technical defect of the elevator. I did this with trembling hands, and suddenly I heard another distant noise. Radio music from somewhere in the canteen. I slowly moved down to the canteen with my smartphone light switched on. The noise, it came from the kitchen, and I followed it. Reaching the kitchen, I saw that a radio was playing music on some of the tables. The cooks, they listened to radio while working. I froze, and I couldn't breathe. During my first walk, the janitor texted me and told me to put the radio under a certain desk and switch it off, as the cooks would always store it there. I did this directly when I started my shift, even texting him, because I couldn't find the desk at first, after plugging out the radio. I turned around, and I sprinted through the canteen, directly to an exit, and I waited outside for the last 2 hours. Luckily, I had the keys with me when someone for the day shift came. When he arrived, I got into the building with him. I took my bag and I left quickly. I called myself in sick for the next 2 weeks, and after that, I quit that job, using excuses like it's disrupting my sleep cycle, etc. Till this day, I have no idea what happened that night.
I am now 29 and work as a security guard doing nights in the UK. The site I usually do my duty at is in the northwest of England, but I will not give the name of the site or specific area to keep my job secure. This is going to be a long-winded post, but I'm confident that anybody interested in the paranormal will be satisfied. So here goes. So I was in the army at the time when one of my closest friends landed this job first. He was always a very hardcore skeptic, but started to tell me that he was experiencing things that were weird and freaking him out sometimes. After the army, I went into a couple of random jobs whilst I got my momentum back in regular life, and also got myself a SIA license. Eventually my pal got shipped off to another site for the same customer, and I jumped at the opportunity to work in his place. My pal, let's call him Jason, kindly drove me to the site for my induction to meet the guard on duty that night. The guard on duty was a very down-to-earth man in his 50s, and after showing me the ropes, the whole 5 minutes, he asked me what I think about poltergeists. I told him briefly about some of the experiences I have had throughout my life, and his eyes lit up, which sparked a casual friendship ever since. Basically, he told me about 2 guards leaving in the past due to strange things happening at this site, and that every guard has experienced at least one thing there. He is a lot deeper into this stuff than I am, but it adds to his harmless charm, and we have shared many deep conversations about the subject. Saturday night, during the Christmas holidays in 2018, I locked myself in for the first time, and ready to spend the next 12 hours alone enjoying my own company and getting paid for it. Gaming laptop straight out, albeit on whisper volume of course, and frequent heads up in case of intruders or van drivers coming to collect their personal vehicles. This place is quite creepy looking, as it is out in the sticks somewhat, and surrounded by farmland. But I am very used to cutting about in the dark in places similar from my time in the army, so it was just whatever to me. For the first few shifts, I just heard the odd strange noise, which quite frankly could have been anything from temperature expansion and contraction to wildlife. However, on the night prior to the staff returning to work for 2019, I had one of the most profound paranormal experiences of my life, which genuinely scared me. It was the 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. hourly patrol. I stepped off at about 3:30, and as I put one foot out of the guardroom door, a tiny stone whizzed around the guardroom, bouncing off the metal lockers, desk, etc. at head to torso height. I am 6 foot tall. This didn't make any sense, but I shrugged it off and continued on my way. The first part of my patrol involved walking around the back of a 2-story medium-sized office building, where there are lots of stone pebbles to walk on before coming out from the back of the offices and onto a relatively large car park, about 2/3 the size of a football pitch. As soon as I stepped foot on the tarmac, a pebble landed next to me, and I thought nothing of it. I could have easily kicked one up a bit with my steel-toed boots and not felt it. Whatever. I got halfway across this car park, and another landed just in front of me, as if it came from behind me. This is where I started to feel things weren't quite right, as the pebbles were way back by this point, and I would have felt it this time due to the added force of it. I continued, and at the end of the car park were a row of shipping containers on the left, and a huge biffa skip on the right. The patrol route takes me walking between these for about 30 meters, and this is by far the creepiest part of the site, as it's so dark and dingy. This is where things began to get intense. I was still walking towards this area, and roughly 20 meters away when another pebble hit the biffa skip loudly, about 5 to 6 feet high. In other words, I would have had to get a bit of a run-up and put effort into booting a pebble hard enough to get it high enough to match the force it hit with. This really startled me, and I stood still and confused for about 30 seconds looking all around myself, but there was nobody, and I was equipped with a 400 lumen heavy-duty torch, so I could see for quite a distance. Nobody whatsoever. I reluctantly carried on out of duty down the alley, past the skip that had just been hit and the shipping containers to my left. I'd gotten about 10 meters past the first shipping container when it sounded as if somebody ran up to it with a sledgehammer and gave it a massive whack. My backside almost swallowed my pants whole, and it took every ounce of courage to immediately run back to the car park and shine my torch in all directions. If this was a human, due to the layout of the site, they could not have gotten away in time unless they could contest Usain Bolt. And even that would be a stretch, considering it probably took me 2 seconds to sprint there, if that. The guard that gave me the induction is that interested in this stuff that he told me to call him if anything like this happens, no matter the hour. So I continued to the center of the car park to get a full field of view of the site, but of course, nobody. Suddenly I just heard bang, 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 coming from all directions but confined to within the site. Shortly followed by tiny stones constantly whizzing past my shins with a low trajectory, similar to how one would throw skimming stones across a body of water. The thing is about these stones whizzing past me is that the direction they were coming from was a huge 3-story high warehouse with no windows or doors from my point of view. So these tiny stones were being thrown at me from an unseen force for 100% certainty, as all that was there was 3 stories of brick wall. Never once did any of them hit me, just whizzed past my legs left and right. Behind this warehouse is a river that gets quite choppy in the winter, but even so, the trajectory dictated that the stones were definitely being thrown from in front of me and not over the warehouse, which would be next to an impossible feat anyway. I rang the other guard, and he could immediately hear the racket going on. He told me to go by the river and call out to it. Now, despite having a few experiences sparsely throughout my life, I've never been interested in engaging with whatever the phenomena is, but I decided to humor him anyway, all the while crapping my pants. I called out to it. I can't remember what I said, and everything immediately stopped and went silent. Nothing further happened that night, and the other guard said he's never known anybody to get terrorized quite that badly by it. Once the staff arrived, I spoke to one of the blokes managing the site, and he said he would check the CCTV footage for any messes. Interestingly, the next shift a couple of days later, the cleaner who used to be around for a couple of hours after the staff leave called me into the office block to see a document printed out of an email. This was my security firm about the events, but stated that they could not see anybody or any stones on camera, but could see me doing an intense investigation and being violently startled a few times. Since then, I have had very sparse experiences, such as doors slamming, a filled mop bucket moving 3 feet from the wall in front of my eyes, plates smashing in the canteen. Very annoying, as security often gets the blame for this, understandably. Cutlery having a quick jangle in the canteen drawer, a loud sound of what can only be described as heavy cardboard boxes being dragged along the dusty warehouse floor, and footsteps coming from the room above. A few months into the job, I also got another very close friend a job there, who was also in the army prior and also a massive skeptic until now. He literally laughed at myself and Jason whilst we gave him his induction when we mentioned the strange stuff. Jason to this day references his cocky laugh, as his attitude soon got set straight. So a few nights into my other friend, let's call him Scott, working there, I get woken up to a phone call at about 1:30 a.m. and it is Scott with a trembly voice saying that somebody has just sprinted up the stairs, ran through the short corridor, and is currently stood outside the guard room door. I said, "Well, you're a security guard. Do your job and see who it is." Of course, nobody was there, and nobody could be there due to coded doors. I haven't experienced anything paranormal there for a long time now. It seems to have weeks, months of calm, followed by short bursts of activity. I've also since branched out and done all of the sites my company contracts with, and never had an experience elsewhere, besides one place to which I have video evidence of, but am reluctant to share, and even then I need permission from the guard who works that particular site. I've even worked at a number of derelict, creepy old mills with nothing strange going on. Hope you enjoyed my story.
Let me start off by saying it took a lot of convincing to even share my story. I don't know what to feel. What I do know, as of typing this, the activity is ramping up tenfold. I'm weary of sharing any actual names, including my own, as you might see why. And before you go off immediately writing this off as someone high off crack, trying to make a poor excuse for a ghost story, I assure you, I'm not. This is my story, that myself and 3 others know of. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm only here for 2 reasons. To see if anyone has had the same experience and or can help me in ridding this thing away from me. So with all that out of the way, let's begin. I will name myself X. I was 21 at the time of this incident. I'm now 22. I worked many different jobs, mainly the food industry. My father was part of the HQ staff of a security company, one that still operates today. I eventually decided to try my hand in something completely different. Security, of course. I worked for the company for about 8 months as a level 2 officer, and after about 1 year, I moved up to level 3. Level 3 is someone authorized to carry and handcuff, according to the company's policies and clients' policies. I was moved to my first ever post as a level 3, a hospital located in San Antonio. I will not give out the name. Anyways, I worked at said hospital for about 3 months until I was told that there was an abandoned section of the hospital. I was offered a tour. Before I go further, I should explain who was with me upon entering the abandoned section. First up is Agent Y. Agent Y was a former Secret Service agent who retired and eventually ended up in the security company I was in. Next up is Marine 1 and 2. As the name suggests, these two were former Marines. One was infantry, who was in the Battle of Fallujah and continued to see more action for another 6 years before leaving. Marine 2 was a former drill instructor. I'm saying this as a point of reference to show you that these people were not some wannabe thugs taken off the street to become some lousy security officers. In fact, 70% of the company are of military or law enforcement background. Anyways, Agent Y was my supervisor of the site. Each site needed a supervisor. I won't go into detail about that. Agent Y also so happened to be the hospital's main security supervisor. Agent Y and Marine 1 and 2 all went with me to the abandoned section. We all had our own flashlights. We explored essentially the whole building without any incident until we reached the ICU. God damn it. I'm crying as I type this. This is gonna haunt me until I die. We reached the ICU. We were stopped as there was a 3-way fork. Each hall, it had a miniature hall connecting to the next. All 3 hallways were parallel to each other. We decided on the far left one, and we continued down. The plan was to go down all the way, circle back, and take the next hallways. If it weren't for what I was about to experience, it was almost entrancing to see all the equipment and whatnot just left there to rot. We reached the end of the first hallway when, before all of us could turn around, Agent Y was the first to notice the Marine 2 was fixated on a doorway. When we all turned in the direction of Marine 2, I immediately felt sick, like I was going to vomit violently. It started to smell like rotten meat. This all took within a span of about 3 seconds. When we all faced the doorway, we all immediately noticed it. It was peeking at us from the top of the doorway. God, I need to step away for a moment. It stared at us from the top of that doorway. I was more immediately drawn to its eyes. I would have expected normal eyes, but was instead met with inky blackness. There were voids where its eyes should have been. Marine 1 was the first to run, followed by Marine 2. I then ran next, my heart beating fast. As I was running, I noticed Agent Y outrunning me. For some god-awful reason, I was compelled to turn around to see if it was chasing us. The damn thing was floating towards us. From here, I'm not quite sure what happened, as my brain essentially blacked out. But what I do know is that a few months later, the abandoned building was destroyed. I genuinely wish that it would stop here. But it gets worse. Agent Y, 3 weeks after the building's demolition, he committed suicide. A few days later, Marine 1 died under unknown circumstances. I tried to live my life without an acknowledgement of what I saw. But I still see that godforsaken thing in the corner of my eye. I fear I'm next. Any advice would be of genuine help. Update. About 5 days ago, I eventually got a priest who performed an exorcism on the house. The entity was only kept at bay for some time, but eventually decided to not only torment me, but rather Marine 2 as well. They seem to have taken the brunt of this thing's anger. This shit is starting to sound more and more unbelievable. But I genuinely wish that this was all a joke. God, I wish it was. Final update. Thank you for your feedback, but I can't take it anymore. It's messing with me every day, and it's getting worse and worse.
Back in 2015, I was working at a company with a very old building. This building is located behind or at the very end of a historic area. This complex is often visited by tourists. Major events are usually held there, and it's been an iconic place since the 70s. Apparently, the building was once their office. At the time of this story, the company was to be holding an exhibit. My team and I decided to stay overnight to make the scale model of the product we'll be displaying. Around midnight, my team evacuated from our space to the graphic designer's conference room since their table is huge. The table is at the center with 2 wooden office tables behind it. There are 5 people in my team, including myself. One of my team members stayed at our own space. Let's call her A. 2 of us went into the conference room, B and myself. We're both female. While the 2 remaining members decided to go out and eat, D and E, who are both male. I sat facing B, the 2 tables behind me. While we're building a part of the scale model, I noticed someone moving near one of the office tables behind me, in the corner of my eye. I turned my head in that direction. There was no one. I thought A came in without us noticing, but then I realized it can't be A, because the woman I saw is too tall. I faced B. Once again, I see the woman moving. I can recognize that it's a woman. I can see her wearing a uniform. She's wearing a pencil skirt, like a normal employee. She's constantly moving. I decided to tell B about it, and she didn't believe me. She didn't see anything, and considering she's facing that area, I told her that it's a woman that I can only see in my peripheral vision, but when I full-on look, she disappears. We hurriedly continued building our scale model so we could get out of there quickly. More than 30 minutes later, we evacuated and settled in the main office. This location has the typical office dividers. B and I sat on the floor, her back against one of the dividers. Later, A joined us. We were using the power outlet to use the electric file tool for our scale model, when suddenly, I felt something land on the back of my head. Everything happened so fast. A and B screamed and quickly stood up. I saw 3 crumpled papers in front of me. B ran to the lobby. We followed her, terrified. A said maybe D and E were pulling a prank on us. But 3 minutes later we spotted D and E coming into the building carrying our food that we asked them to buy. We went back to the main office. I straightened the papers. One of them had something written on it.
I found this in the bathroom.
The other 2 were blank. B said those papers came from the other side of the divider. Since we're the only ones there, who could have thrown the crumpled papers? We freaked out, but continued our work because we're rushing. Moments later, I was searching my phone and decided to go back to our department. To get there, I had to walk down the center hall, in between rows and rows of dividers. That's when I saw a figure again, this time a male. I saw him for a split second walking in front of me. He's wearing a white shirt and jeans, with very black hair and a bowl cut. He looks skinny, like a teenager. I saw him 3 times after that, until we decided to go home. Weeks later, after we had our egress, my fellow designers hung out and we told our ghost stories. One of my colleagues, she's not part of our team, said she recently saw a guy in the main office wearing a white shirt and jeans. I then asked her, does this guy also have black hair and a bowl cut? She replied, yeah, his hair looks like one of the Beatles. More ghosts are lurking in that complex. That building is now abandoned. Last night around 8:30 p.m, I went out to the edge of the woods on my property to set up a blind to shoot some nuisance coyotes that have been eating my chickens. I live in New Hampshire, at an area where people who live near these woods commonly refer to a phenomena known as bad nights. It's an eerie feeling where you don't want to be anywhere near a door or window when it gets dark, and you certainly don't want to be outside. Animal life seems to be affected as well, since it's always eerily quiet on those nights. Thankfully, it was a good night, so I thought I'd be fine. I set up with a long-range modified handgun, a mounted night vision scope with a thermal setting, and a high-end night vision handheld. Both pieces of equipment have a high 4-figure price range. I set up facing the woods, and for most of the night I saw nothing, coyote or otherwise. A little before 10:30, I was scanning the field just before the tree line with my thermal scope when I saw a red orb pop up. It was about 4 feet off the ground, not moving. The thermal was giving a reading of 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which made no sense, considering it was around 40 degrees Fahrenheit that night. Also, the scope is very high definition. I can see small birds at 50 yards away, and they show up perfectly bird-shaped. There's no reason anything should look round. It also had a strange, low-quality, staticky look to it, which AIs made no sense considering it was well within my 50-yard marker at the tree line. When I went to switch to night vision mode, it disappeared. I never saw anything else like it for the rest of the night. Later on, around 11, my handheld night vision scope started malfunctioning. The brightness and exposure was fluctuating wildly for no reason, and it was randomly turning on and off. I chalked it up to the battery being dead or dying, and stopped using it. But this afternoon, when I started to get my equipment ready again, it was working perfectly normally. It's the same temperature again today, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's not temperature related. The final weird thing was that around midnight, right as I was packing up to head inside, after having no luck with my coyote problem, as my gun jammed and the animals ran off, I heard a voice, laughing. It sounded echoey, and due to being on a hill, and there being lots of trees, I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. I thought it was my neighbor who lives on the other side of the field. Note, the house was not in the direction I was firing towards, just so no one comes for me about gun safety. The house was 200 feet behind me and to the left. This morning, the neighbor was talking to me about how my hunt went, and I joked with her that she should know considering she laughed after I missed my shot. She was confused, and I said I heard laughing and assumed it was from her house. She said no one in the house was outside or even awake at that time of night. So, what do y'all think? Forest ghost? Messing with my equipment and laughing at me? Or just equipment malfunctions? I'm going out again tonight, and I'll try to record if anything like that happens again. Yesterday, I, 25 female, decided to go for a quick solo hike 40 minutes to the peak in rural New Hampshire to pick blueberries at the top. I've done this hike by myself several times before, 30 plus times actually, and have only felt unsafe one other time when I encountered some coyotes. This time was different. Yesterday was a foggy, misty day, which I thought would be a great day to hike since it wasn't hot. I pulled into the parking lot around 3 p.m. and nobody else was there. I started off my hike by listening to music on my phone. The trail was a bit muddy, but all was well. About halfway up, the trees became shrouded with mist, which is normal when elevation is increasing. The second half of the way up, I felt uneasy but ignored it and continued listening to my music. I reached the peak. I was the only one up there and began picking blueberries. About 15 minutes into the picking, I began to faintly hear a group of children talking and laughing. I grabbed my stuff and brought it closer to me, preparing to give the other group coming up some more space. They were far away enough where I couldn't make out anything they were saying, but I could faintly hear them shrieking and laughing. After about another 15 minutes, the group still hadn't reached the peak, and I remember thinking it was odd that I could hear them for that long and they still hadn't arrived. Mind you, this mountain only has one trail leading to the peak. After a few more minutes, the realization hit me that it almost sounded like a recording. I stopped picking berries and listened. Every 30 seconds or so, the same laughs, shrieks, and voices would loop. At this point, I began to feel very uneasy and packed up my things to leave. On the way down, I had a feeling that I shouldn't listen to music, to be more aware of my surroundings. I pulled out a small switchblade and held it in my hand, just to feel a little more safe. At this point, it was around 5 p.m. and it was getting darker. Mist was still shrouding the top of the mountain and visibility wasn't great. I was half expecting to pass a group of kids, but never did. In fact, it was chillingly silent. The laughing and shrieking had completely disappeared. I felt extremely unsettled and like something off the trails was watching me, and began to see bizarre, unexplainable things deep into the sides of the trail. Dark figures, strange faces, etc. The thing that has been etched into my mind and inspired me to share this story was maybe 50 to 75 feet off the trail to my right. I can only describe it as 4 perfect cylinders, round, smooth, brown, that resembled legs, going far enough up into the saplings that I couldn't see a body attached to them. Whatever it was appeared to be facing me, and must have been at least 10 to 12 feet tall. I only got a glimpse of it, and by the time it registered to me that I was looking at something strange, it was gone. I picked up my pace and kept my eyes on the ground below my feet. 20 minutes to go. Just as I was reaching the point where the mist was fading, I heard an ear-piercing screech. The only thing I can compare it to is a dog whistle that lasted 5 to 10 seconds, then silence again. My heart was racing, but the only thing I could do was keep moving towards my car. Once I got below the mist line, the uneasy feeling let up a bit, and didn't experience anything else after the screech. Has anybody heard of anything like this happening, or has anybody experienced anything like this? I can't stop thinking about it. I don't think I'll be hiking there alone again anytime soon. In the summer of 2013, I was hiking the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain, and I saw something I will never forget. I don't know how much of it was real because I was cold, hungry, thirsty, exhausted and sick when I saw it. But good Lord, it scared me. I was on the Camino Primitivo, the oldest section of the Camino. It's also the least well-traveled. I'd go there days without seeing anyone else on the road. There is a stretch about 20 kilometers through the mountains called Los Hospitales. because there are some ruins of medieval hospitals along the path in the heights. It's supposed to be the best view on the whole 200 kilometers of Primitivo, so I really wanted to see it. It's a long story, but I'll try to leave out the less important bits. I didn't mean to be in such a bad shape that day. There's a small shelter a few clicks before the mountains, so I planned to stop there the night before and then continue. As I neared the shelter, someone had scrawled a message on the wall, warning not to stay there because the hospitalero, as the guys who take care of the places are called, is a thief. At the previous town, there had been a sign that said there was no hospitalero at this shelter, so of course I was suspicious. Sure enough, when I arrived, there was an unwashed old man cooking a can of beans over a fire outside of the shelter who asked me for money to stay. I decided that I didn't trust him, so I just got my stamp, proving I had gone through that village, and pressed on. So I started the Los Hospitales stage after already walking almost a full day's walk. The villages were too small to have grocery stores or even restaurants, so I had no food or water other than what little was in my pack. I was getting over a cold as well, and although it wasn't bad at this point, it started to bother me more as I fatigued. As I started to climb the mountain, I passed a sign that read, "Peligro, osos," danger, bears. But at this point I was committed, so I kept going. When I got near the top of the mountains, the weather changed. It was so foggy that I couldn't see more than a few meters in front of me. When I looked over the edge of the path, it was straight down into a foggy abyss. It was also cold. It was well into June, but the high was in the 50s, and the mist only made it worse for a guy wearing only shorts and a tank top. When I got on the plane, I had no idea what the weather would be like, and I foolishly imagined northern Spain to be a Mediterranean climate. The only vegetation was the short grass and some sparse moss. Other than that, the landscape was just small rocks. Somehow there were cattle grazing up there, and horses. I don't know how they survived on such little food. I walked for several hours until I came to the ruins. At this point, I decided to try to camp out in the stones. I put a tarp up next to the stone wall, but the mist was so thick that it penetrated the tarp, my poncho, my astronaut blanket, everything. I was freezing. I was cold before, but when I stopped moving, I immediately started shivering wildly. I decided that despite my fatigue, I'd continue. Hell, if I didn't, I was going to freeze to death up there. The path alternated between the top of the ridge and the side of the mountain. I would have to occasionally climb down from the path holding onto shrubs. It was really steep. To avoid the huge steers with horns longer than my arm span, and their calves blocking the way, I'd run out of water and food. The food made me sick to my stomach anyway, and I had no idea how far I had gone through the mist or how much farther I had to go. Then, on a stretch along the flat top of the mountain dotted with otherworldly pools of mist and rainfall, I saw it. A herd of horses came galloping past me without warning. And when I turned around, there was the biggest steer I'd ever seen. It was walking slowly towards me in the direction the horses had gone. As it approached, I noticed that it was getting taller, not larger, but its legs appeared to be elongating. At this point, it was still a more or less faint outline in the mist, but when it was very close, less than 10 meters, I could see it clearly. The body was more or less normal, but the legs were almost 2 meters long and rail thin. The thing towered over me, but the abnormal proportions weren't the only strange thing about it. This steer had fangs. An entire mouthful of long, jagged, yellow, sharp fangs. When it opened its mouth and revealed them, I ran. I don't know how far it was, but I didn't stop until I reached a highway at the far end of the mountain and heard the humming of a telephone line at last. I saw some other creepy stuff that day as I made my way to the next habitable place. most notably a ruined town with a population of one old Asturian man and his huge dog. But after the demon steer, nothing bothered me too much. I made it to the next small town that had a hostel so late that everything was closed, and I had to sleep outside in the 20-degree Fahrenheit weather. I really want to blame what I saw on my questionable physical and mental state at the time. I walked 48 kilometers that day, according to the guidebook, about 13 hours in all. But I can't forget what some of the older locals had told me about avoiding the areas around dolmens, prehistoric burial stones in the mountains. As far as I know, there isn't a dolmen in Los Hospitales, but the people living there have legends of strange remnants from the area's Celtic past living on in the mountains. And I saw something that makes me wonder if they aren't just legends. I used to work on the north slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaska Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for their oil-producing qualities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, deep in the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished and were headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out of for safety. No cell reception, and radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 a.m. Not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow, as the speed limit on the roads is only 25 miles per hour, when something appeared on the road in our headlights. It was a man, in jeans, sneakers and a hoodie jacket, walking down an ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m. and it was minus 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help, and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had had enough of all this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just going to try and shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him though, this walking popsicle spun around and latched onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy, and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At that moment, this guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude still had a hold on my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held onto my buddy to keep him inside. After several moments, it could have only been a few seconds at most, my buddy tore free from this guy and we hauled ass to the guard shack, another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard, and we're told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at the shack, we asked him if they ever saw Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us they searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing, not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for making him waste a shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that? And who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that dude, if he even was a dude. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place. This is a personal story that happened to me a few years ago when I was 26. I've been too scared to talk about it until now, out of fear of being made fun of. So, here's my story. Call me Sarah. 4 years ago, my great-grandmother passed away at the age of 98. We were close all the way into my adult years, so the death hit me hard. She lived in a one-story house in a rural town 30 minutes outside of Springfield, Missouri. Her house sat on a large and heavily forested piece of land. There was a large hill several feet behind the house that dropped off into a creek. I spent my entire childhood staying on this piece of land and had learned how to take care of it and the house. After the funeral services, I volunteered to stay and take care of the land while my family decided on what to do with it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to buy the land, so I wanted to spend as much time out there as I could. My first 3 days I spent packing up items and cleaning the house. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, so I didn't have to worry about unwanted guests that would get in the way of my packing and disturb my personal way of mourning the loss of someone so close to me. The 4th day is when the odd events started occurring. I slept in a sleeping bag in the living room, and when I woke up, I immediately screamed. A few inches away from my face was a dead copperhead snake. It was normal for snakes and other small animals to get into the house, so seeing the snake wasn't surprising. It was the fact that it was so close to my face and it could have bitten me at any moment while I was sleeping. I briefly wondered why the snake had just come in the house and died because there were no physical signs that anything was wrong with it. So I threw it outside and continued with my day, and the weird event was almost forgotten. Later that evening, I decided to go for a walk through the woods to enjoy the nice weather and reminisce about the good times I'd had in the woods and all the games we used to play. I was walking along an old path that led to a well. The path was narrow and was close to the drop-off that led to the creek. I heard a branch snap behind me and instinctively turned my head. I didn't see anything, so I assumed it was an animal and continued walking. Just a few minutes later, I heard a snap to my left and turned to look again, but I still didn't see anything. I started to worry that I was being stalked by something, but it was rare to see large animals in this area, so I continued walking. I heard a third snap directly in front of me, but now instead of being worried, I was upset. I was convinced that someone else was out here trying to scare me, so I shouted at what I assumed to be a person, "Go away!" and everything went uncomfortably silent. I started to hear footsteps approaching in front of me, but I couldn't see anything. They got faster and faster until whoever or whatever it was running right at me. I covered my face with my arms and waited to be attacked by some invisible person, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly lowered my arms, but instead of seeing a person, a bobcat, or even a bear, I saw a gigantic spider in the middle of a web I hadn't noticed before. If I would have taken one more step, I would have ended up being bitten. I turned and ran as fast as I could through the overgrowth and back to the house. I was spooked, but I was out in the middle of the woods, and sometimes things like this happened. I knew this land and the house well, so I pushed through the night, and the next 2 days, nothing out of the ordinary happened. I started yard work my second week staying at the house, and it wasn't bad. I'd actually found some old trinkets from my childhood that I'd buried under a tree. While I was picking up fallen branches from a storm that previous night, I noticed a clump of hair was caught in one of them. I remember its color being brown and black and considered the possibility of it being a rare encounter with a bear. But there were no tracks that I could see. I brushed it off again, but I was starting to think that maybe someone else was staying on the property, and that upset me. I decided to stay up late and see if I could catch the person in the act. Nothing happened until around 2 a.m. I remember everything so vividly because of how terrified I was. It started with branches crunching and the sound of the wheelbarrow I'd been using earlier falling over. I readied my flashlight and a small knife just in case whoever it was got violent. I heard them step onto the front porch and pull at the screen door, but they quickly abandoned it and instead started walking around the house. I could hear them scraping something sharp against the house, and I was furious. I stood up and shined my flashlight at the nearest window that I assumed the person was standing near, and shouted at them, "I have a weapon, get off this property now." Everything stopped, and I was positive that whoever it was had left, until I heard something slam against the window, so hard I was surprised it didn't break. My flashlight shined on the person, and at first I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It had long, dark hair, with eyes that were way too big for its face. Its skin was wrinkled and reminded me of a naked mole rat. It pressed its face against the glass and fogged it up with its breath. I heard it run around the house several times and bang on every wall, window, and the door every time it passed them. This went on for hours, and I was too scared to move or do anything. I was completely alone, being tormented by some strange monster. Every now and then, I would get the courage to shine my flashlight and caught a glimpse of the thing. Each time I saw it, it looked more animal-like. All I could do was cry and wait for it to go away. Finally, just after sunrise, the running and banging stopped. But I didn't dare move until well after 9 a.m. It took all my courage to open the front door and see what damage had been done to the house and yard after the terrifying experience from the night before. But there was nothing. No footprints, no scratches against the house or broken or cracked windows. It was almost like I'd imagined the whole thing, but I knew what I saw and had experienced was real. Nothing else happened for the rest of my stay there, and by the end of the month my grandfather came to pick me up and take care of the belongings I'd packed away. I was still terrified by what had happened, but I had almost convinced myself that I'd imagined it until my grandfather spoke to me. He told me that he was happy that this land was being sold and how much he hated growing up here. When I asked him why, his answer seemed to validate my experience. Now, my grandfather is a serious, no-nonsense man. He was the type of person that stayed quiet, but when he did speak, you'd better listen because it was important. He was a hardened war veteran and devoted Christian, so things like paranormal and supernatural were just fairy tales to him. He made sure to tell his children and me and the rest of my siblings and cousins that. He told me how his mother, my great-grandmother, would always try to scare him and his sister with stories about the land being guarded by monsters. The story says that these monsters, hybrids is what we call them, were the children of falsely accused witches. The people living in the area back when this was going on claimed that the children were part witch and part animal and needed to be killed. So they were left in the forest to die. He said that when the witch children died, they came back as spirits and claimed the woods as their own, and any unwelcome visitors would be tortured until they were literally scared to death. Just how their falsely accused mothers had been scared when they had been killed. My grandfather said he didn't believe in much outside of his religion, but he believed that the hybrids were real, and that he had been tormented by one when he tried to go hunting in the woods for the first time and shot his first deer. He believed he had upset the hybrids by killing an innocent animal and never stepped foot on the land with a weapon, and they finally left him alone. Maybe it is a foolish thing to believe, but I believe that the story my grandfather told me is true, simply because we both had similar terrifying experiences. If I had had a camera, I would have tried to take a picture of the creature, or if I could draw, I would post a picture of the drawing. I remember every detail about what I saw, and will be burned into my memory forever. All of my childhood memories seem tainted now because of this experience, and now I don't think I'm going to miss the land as much as I first thought. It didn't take long for the land and the house to be sold. The hybrids, or whatever is out there, can be somebody else's nightmare. One night was more than enough for me. Have you ever heard of Changcheng High School's beautiful and picturesque lake? Oh yeah, it is indeed famous, but underneath it was a tunnel which led to a room, and during the Japanese occupation, it was the torture room. And until today, though the tunnel was destroyed, you may still see the big hole in the lake at night, when the water is clear, when the fountains are closed. I saw it during my NPCC camp in school. It was a terrifying view. I seemed to hear faint groans and eerie laughter in the still night from the clear lake. And I saw this big, dark hole in the lake. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but when I asked my friend to look at the lake, he also saw it. But he could not hear the faint noise coming out of it. I asked him where the big hole led to, and he said it led to the old Audi's basement, and that basement was locked and had chains and locks on the door. When we went back to our rooms, our classrooms, we saw an old attendant, and we normally call him Uncle Lee. He was currently the oldest attendant serving for the school, and we had heard lots of stories from him. We related to him of our experience, and he said, "I sometimes also see the hole, and I went to the old Audi's basement to take a look, and I heard the groans more clearly." We were in awe by his courage, and asked him if he had ever seen ghosts before. He said, "A few years ago, when students like you all camp in school, I had to look after you all, and that time I was not so brave, but I tried to explore with them the old Audi. Then," he said with a laugh, "it was terrible." And the smile from his face faded. After that, he went back to his room and told us not to think too much and go to sleep. A few years ago in northern parts of Sweden, I was going out for a nice evening of fishing. I am what I guess is called a fishing supervisor. I check that the other fishermen have their licenses at certain areas of lakes and streams. This is in the late summer, and I've been doing my round, which I usually end with going to a small lake and fly fish for some trout. This lake or pond is pretty deep in the forest, and I rarely meet anyone there. Actually, I've never met anyone there. The lake looks kind of like a crater, a perfect round circle that is perhaps 100 meters in diameter. It contains a natural population of perch and trout. It is a warm summer evening with a slight breeze. The birds are chirping and the fish are rising to all the insects spawning on the surface. I rig my gear and aim for one of the fish rising to the right of me. The same second as my fly lands on the surface, it is like someone pauses time. The sun hides behind a cloud. The wind stops blowing. The birds are suddenly silent and the fish stop eating. A smell rises from the ground I'm standing on. It smells like something dead, something rotten. Like I have a carcass buried under my feet. All of a sudden, I am aware that there is something walking out of the forest behind me, maybe 10 to 15 meters back. It is like I can see it in the corner of my eye, but I still really can't see it. Every hair on my body is on end, and it is suddenly very cold around me. The thing watching me just stands there, and I don't have the courage to turn around at all. I see my fly sink to the bottom, but I can't move. I can't do anything about it because I don't dare to move. Then the wind hits me, and it carries the awful smell away. The sun comes out again. A bird is singing somewhere in the forest, and the almost overtaking feeling of being watched lets go of me. I turn around and there is nothing there. On the lake, the fish start rising again. I pack my gear and throw the backpack on my back and run for it, through the forest to my car. I hit the gas and drive like a maniac until I find a big road and civilization again. I park at the side of the road, and I say to myself, what the hell was that? My heart is still racing. I haven't been to this lake since this happened, and I don't know anyone else who has either. What do you guys think it was? I've probably visited this place 20 times before this happened, and never felt anything like it. The only thing is that I'm always afraid of bears when visiting it. I do fish at a lot of ponds and lakes that are pretty deep in the forest. There's always a lot of wildlife in these places. Deers, moose, fox, and the occasional wolf, bobcat and bear. I'm never afraid of meeting one except when I've been at this particular lake. This happened when I was in Hyderabad. Some of my friends thought of having a party in an open space, so we're thinking of going to this place called Osman Sagar. It's nearby to Gandapet. I said okay because the place is a huge lake, and I have visited that place like 2 years back. So we all started the journey from our place, and we're driving to the lake. We started at around 10:30, and we kept the drinks in a cooler box. There was a lot of drizzling while we were going, but as soon as we reached there, the sky completely cleared up, and there was a dazzling view of a million stars, like they were looking upon us. We stopped on the bridge of Osman Sagar, but there were grills placed which were not there before when I visited 2 years back. Also, there were police patrolling. So we thought it's better we go to the backside. So we went to the backside, which was full of bushes and trees. We were sitting on the car, only opened our car doors there, just chilling out, smoking. It was almost midnight, so I thought we will start the drinks. But just then, we heard a huge splash. We all stopped in our tracks, and we were like, what the hell? Because we were on the other side of the lake, and there was nothing that tall to make a huge splash sound like that. Then we all got down from our car and walked towards the shore of the lake, and were looking towards the bridge. There was this figure, glowing in white. The bridge was at least 550 meters away, but we were clearly able to see the spirit for some reason. The figure just passed through the grills and jumped into the water with a huge cry, which sounded like a lady, and we all could hear it. It fell into the water with a huge splash. My friends were all freaked out and started running towards the car, but I was walking towards the water. I was in a trance. one of my friends held my hand and started dragging me towards the car, and I was still trying to go towards the lake. Another friend slapped me and I snapped out of it. We all got into the car, and the driver started reversing it. I looked at the bridge. The white figure was standing again on the bridge and jumped again, with a cry, and again there was a splash. We drove away, and got on the outer ring road, and then we started having drinks and talking about it. My friend asked me what happened, and I said I heard something was calling out for help. My friends never took me back there again. I understand it was a residual haunting, which is like residual entities that do not have a sense of what's happening around them, but they just keep happening again and again. Later, when I surfed the net, I came to know that this lake has been a suicide spot for many. However, what I don't understand is how it was able to call out to me, and more importantly, how I was the only one who could hear the calling out. It is still a mystery to me. This happened to me a few years ago, and it wasn't until today that I realized I may have been in some sort of danger. My husband and I were camping with two friends in a pretty remote area, deep in the mountains on the shore of a small lake. Our first morning there, I decided to paddleboard to the other side of the lake. One thing about me, I have submechanophobia, which is a fear of submerged objects in water. It doesn't affect me too badly. I love the water. But I get the heebie-jeebies when I see sunken boats, large fallen trees, massive boulders in the water, stuff like that. It's worse when I'm alone. I do pretty okay when other people are with me, and it has to be a large clear body of water. Swimming pools, rivers, or lakes where the water isn't super clear don't bother me. So I go off by myself on my board. The lake is on one big oval, so you can basically see everything from the shoreline. However, where we had set up camp, you couldn't see the whole lake, so I quickly lost sight of my husband. I started to freak out a little bit because I had immediately seen a big sunken tree. This is a high Sierra lake, so the water is crystal clear, but quickly turns black because of how deep it is. I told myself I was being silly and needed to get over my dumb phobia. I didn't really see anything else, but I decided to stay close to the shore because usually that makes me feel better. But this lake doesn't really have a typical shore. It's all granite rock that just quickly and steeply drops into the water. I still don't really see much in the water, but I'm really starting to panic, which is weird. I have this overwhelming feeling to get back as fast as I can, but I think I'm just being dumb. I tried to deep breathe because I really want to get to the other side where there is a waterfall. So I trudge on, trying to calm myself and enjoy nature, yet still feeling like I should go back. As I'm paddling, I start to realize how alone I am. I keep looking around, hoping to see a hiker, but I'm completely by myself. I try not to think about that because I'm almost to the waterfall, and the view is gorgeous. As I get closer, I see there is an island, for lack of a better word. Just a large amount of granite that is fairly close to the shore. There is a single plastic chair sitting on the island, which is funny but slightly unsettling because it's such a weird thing to see so deep in nature. I'm still freaked out, so I figured if I got off my board and onto the island, I would feel better because I would be on land, and my phobia wouldn't bother me. I pull up my board and start walking around, trying to enjoy the view, and I just can't. I feel terrified. The waterfall is so much louder now that I'm near it, and I realize if I were to scream, no one would hear me. My husband is the only person around for miles, and he can't see or hear me, and I'm terrified. I keep looking around because I feel like I'm being watched. I decide I can't take this, even if it's just my stupid irrational fear. I have to get back as fast as I can. I get on my board and paddle down the center of the lake rather than keep to the shore. because it's quicker that way. It takes everything in me to do it. I still can't shake the feeling I'm being watched, and I feel so damn vulnerable in the center of this deep, black lake. I'm shaking the whole way back, but as I'm getting closer to camp, relief sweeps through me. I get off the board and go see my husband. He happily asks me how it was, and I can't talk. He asks me if I'm okay, and I just start crying. I tell him I think my stupid phobia made me panic, even though I didn't really see anything in the water. I feel totally insane, and I'm just happy our friends aren't back from their hike to see me behaving so irrationally. We left later that day. Since then, I've become more open to the unknown. I was thinking about it, and it suddenly hit me that maybe something was going on, and it wasn't just my phobia, especially because I never even really saw anything that triggers it. I'm not sure if I just freaked out because I was alone, the phobia, or something else. I guess I'll never know, but curious if others have been in a similar situation or have any insight. After reading a few posts on here, I've decided to add one of the creepier, still unexplained events that happened to me and a group of friends within the past 5 years. Thinking back on it, I still get this unnerved, bad feeling that sort of lingers. Anyway, here it goes. A group of friends and myself rented a place on a lake for just a fun-filled drunken weekend. We were all in our young to mid-20s, and it was supposed to be just a big party. For the most part, that's what it was. The Friday night and Saturday morning, we pretty much went all out, having a blast on the water, and just doing fun, stupid stuff. Well, naturally, when Saturday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going all out, we decided it would be a night of no drinking, but maybe a little weed smoking by some of us, and just kind of having a chill evening and night. That's what it was, relaxed. So 9 p.m. comes rolling around, and about 8 of us were inside the house and 5 outside. The house was a 2-story with a 2nd-story deck and back porch, and it was surrounded by the woods, and then down through the woods, you would then hit the lake. I'll mention that we already had experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived in town, mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assumed were leering and irritated because we were a bunch of college-aged kids looking to have a good time. But the town and the lake were large, so it's not like anyone knew where we were staying. Anyways, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch, and my other friend and I were downstairs, outside, just talking on this little old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were just getting lost in conversation, and all of a sudden, there was this weird feeling that encompassed us, like an unnerving physical experience that came from the woods behind us. It was so strong, we both kind of quietened down, and then, out of nowhere, this loud chanting abruptly came from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because of the way the lake is set up. I'm pretty sure the voices carried up through the forest. It sounded like a cult, chanting away, and all the voices were male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we were frozen for all of about 20 seconds before I couldn't contain myself and darted towards the house, with her following me. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came with that chanting, but it was almost evil. Like, just something so powerfully uninviting. I was shaking by the time we got up to the 2nd story and ran out on the balcony with the other 3 friends. One of them was my brother. By the time we got up there, the chanting was gone, and I naturally asked, "Did you guys hear that?" in the most shaky, freaked out voice. They all had heard it, and not seconds later the chanting began again. So the 5 of us are out there peering into the forest, listening to this chanting that would sometimes sound far away and then sound relatively close. All male voices in the weirdest language or I don't even know what it was. Sounded like a strange extreme church. Then, following the chanting, a loud bang like someone hit a huge metal object sounded. And then the worst part came. A man wailing. Like in extreme pain wailing. All of my hair was up. It was the freakiest experience ever. My brother and I were staring at each other in a mixture of scared excitement and horror. The wailing stopped, and then it was back to the chanting, which eventually died out. I was so freaked out by it, I wanted to call the cops because whoever screamed had been in a lot of pain. That, mixed with the weird chanting, just made me immediately think of some terrible sacrifice going on. One friend tried to say it had to be some drunk guys just messing around, singing, and being weird, but no way that was coming from some drunk guys. They were perfectly in sync, then the bang, and then the wail of pain, and then all that weird tension and energy was gone. Nope, I didn't call the cops, and I wish I would have. But honestly, the forest was so large, and since the lake house was up, looking down at the woods and lake, it could have been anywhere. It definitely wasn't in our close proximity, but it was close enough to hear all of that perfectly. We went in and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go explore and find where it had been coming from, but obviously that was a stupid idea. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now, it gives me the worst feeling. Whatever it was, it felt so wrong and evil. I'll never forget that moment. I can only imagine it was some weird cult stuff. This is a true story that contains an old wives' tale from my gran, so it is exactly what it sounds like, and the truth of its accuracy is subjective to what the reader believes. The parts about my mum, Elle, and I are 100% true. We were about 8 or 9 the day Mum took Elle and I over the heath. It was a hot and bright day in the middle of the summer holidays. We had been collecting natural materials to make a collage when we got home, and Mum's rucksack was full of stray feathers, wild grasses, leaves and twigs, and we were on our way home where Gran was making a cheese flan and salad for dinner. As we were all very hot and slightly tired, Mum had decided that we would wade through the river instead of going back over the hills the way we had come. The thought of pushing my tiny wheelchair through the muddy-bottomed, weed-tangled river never seemed to faze my mum. She was a healthy, fit 26-year-old and knew the heath like the back of her hand. The river wasn't very deep at that part, so Mum tipped my wheelchair back, told Elle to hold onto the handle, and we went in. The water immediately soaked our clothes through, and Elle and I started to scream, giggle, and splash each other in sheer delight. Then we saw them, weeds, flowing with the current of the river, swaying back and forth like a woman's long, tangled, unkempt hair. And I got the distinct impression that what we saw could have been either thing. I glanced at Elle and instantly knew that she was having the same uncanny notion. The weeds started to curl around our legs and the wheels of my wheelchair, making our progress a little more laborious, and our previous screams of playful fun changed to moans and squeals of unease and disgust as we felt the weeds gently tugging at our legs. At no point did Mum ever look anxious or fazed by this experience. She just kept saying, "It's only water weeds, you two. Come on, don't be silly. You've seen them loads of times." We finally reached the other side of the river, and as Mum dragged my wheelchair backwards up the riverbank, Elle climbed up it and sat down beside me. We both just stared silently at the river and the sea of green for what felt like the longest time, but in actual fact was only 10 minutes, before walking the rest of the way home. That night, after a hot bubble bath and cheese flan salad, in our flannel pajamas and slipper socks around the fire drinking hot tea, we told Gran about our adventure. Our Gran took a sip of tea from her mug and told us the story of Greenhair. She had been a real person, though her real name had been forgotten by Gran. Conveniently, Elle and I thought. Anyway, she had lived in the village around 1912 before the area was built up and modernized and developed into what it has become. She was young and kind, with a pretty face and beautiful long blonde hair, a daughter of a gentleman farmer, and was deeply in love with a handsome young soldier. They were to get married, but before they could, the Great War broke out, and her young man was called up to fight. He was killed by a hand grenade on the front line, and when she found out she was widowed before she'd even become a wife, she lost the will to live, and, driven by grief-stricken insanity, she went to the same river that we waded through, and she threw herself in. The river was as wild as the land at the time, and by the time her body was discovered, it was blue, bloated and half-eaten by fish. Her long, corn-colored hair had become interwoven with the slimy algae and long strands of evil-smelling river weeds, which clogged and choked the bed of the river. In fact, the pathologist who performed the post-mortem said that the body may have been found sooner if not for the dark green weeds that appeared to have curled around her limbs and torso, anchoring her corpse to the riverbed for days. From that time onwards, it was said that the river was haunted, cursed, or both. Anyway, an extremely bad place. People claimed to see the spirit of the young woman kneeling beside the river and weeping bitterly. More commonly, people often saw the body of the girl floating on top of the water, with her long green hair/weeds streaming out behind her, and so she was given the name of Greenhair. Elle and I asked Gran why we hadn't heard this story before. Gran just smiled and said because it was an age ago, even before she herself was born, and moved to the area. The area was developed and built up, and the river was tidied up and reconstructed, and along with it, the tragic tale of Greenhair was lost to the stream of passing time. We didn't altogether believe Gran's morbid tale, but when Elle and I talked about it in bed that night, neither of us could dismiss the eerie feeling that we felt when we saw green hair flowing in the river that day. I just found this sub, so I figured I'd share my story. I was at my parents' trailer in the far north woods of Wisconsin. Drinks were had and my mum and girlfriend had gone to bed. My dad and I were sitting on the opposite ends of the fire, and he was telling me some story. Behind his left shoulder, my right side, and over our log pile I could see, well, a glimmery entity walking around our neighbor's campsite. My dad kept talking, and I feigned interest as I watched this thing meander about. It didn't seem like it had anything it was specifically doing, but I could clearly see it mosey around their site and seemingly facing their trailer the whole time. Eventually I lost my line of sight, and it seemingly disappeared into the woodline. I don't know what I saw or how to explain it, and am a bit more cautious every time I stay there now. I was 13 years old, in Lake Orion, Michigan, visiting my mum's friends and their kids for the 4th of July weekend. Me and my friend and the other kids were roaming around the city area late at night. We ended up walking down some residential roads. It was really quiet and dead out, probably around 2 a.m. No cars driving around. Just that really calm, peaceful time at night hooligans can run wild. Some of the kids wanted to ding-dong ditch some houses, and I was kind of a straight-edged kid, so I went along with it, even though it made me nervous. We had ding-dong ditched probably 5 houses at that point, and the kids started pressuring me to do it. That it was my turn, don't be such a pussy type stuff. So they directed me to ring the doorbell of the house we were standing in front of. It was a smaller white house, square-shaped, some metal fencing around the back for the owner's dogs. I walked up and there was no doorbell, so I walked back. They told me to just knock then. So, as someone who didn't want to kill the fun, I went back and knocked to find they had already taken off running. I ran after them, and I don't know if I believe what they were saying, but even my friends said they saw it. Apparently, there was a face in the window the first time I went up, and the house is notoriously haunted. So I was a little spooked and out of breath. We must have run half a mile. I looked behind me to see if there was anything scary following us, and I saw this figure that I have always described as looking made out of water. A humanoid figure, translucent, that makes the background behind them wavy, and has a defined outline. I figured my mind was playing tricks on me, and I just kept walking, joking around with the others, looking back every so often. It was following us, and I could see it under the street lamps every so often. The leader kid that wanted to ding-dong ditch houses looked to see what I was looking at, and exclaimed to his friend, "Do you see that?" and took off running. My friend looked back and took off running, and I was again left running after them. We ran all the way back to his house, probably 3 miles. No sign of it behind us anymore, but I've never been so shook up or scared in my entire life. I was inconsolable. I was scared for a while that I would see it again and find out it had been following me the entire time. It's been over 10 years now, and I've never seen anything like that again. And I've never been able to find anything like it searching for hours on the internet. Until now.
Starting off, this happened nearly 10 years ago, but I recently spoke with an old co-worker that I ran into again, and talking about the old days, it was brought up. That was when I realized the feeling of being stalked wasn't limited to me. When I was about 22 and working for a very small security company of only 18 people at the time, we worked a tourist area location called Seven Falls in southwest Colorado Springs, in the Cheyenne Mountain Canyon area. I remember shifts being grueling, due mostly to the fact that we were in direct sunlight until the afternoon and evening. And an average shift, we were expected to walk a minimum of 7 miles between the base of the parking area to the top of the falls, and rarely were allowed to use the guest elevator for handicapped and elderly. The whole park was on a hilly incline, so walking the top down was okay. Bottom up is what exhausted us. In the evening, near the base of the falls, native Ute or Cheyenne tribal dancers would perform, and we had to monitor crowds, which was slight breaks for about 15 to 20 minutes. These falls were frequented by area tribes for hundreds of years, and were still considered spiritual, so it was the native tribes that pushed for the performances since Seven Falls is considered a state park. At the end of the night, we would sit at the main entrance into the falls at the bottom of the canyon, off the lower Gold Camp Road, and monitor the toll booth until roughly 1 a.m. Except during weekends and holidays when we were out there till 3 in the morning. On several occasions when waiting for the end of my shifts, I always had occurrences that made me feel like I was going to get attacked by either an animal or a person. Guttural hissing, deep, mannish groans, and harassing growls could always be heard from behind the giant gate. Glowing eyes, either red or white in color, but larger than area wildlife, could be seen from behind bushes and tree canopies. But what stuck with me was a shimmering humanoid shape. The shimmering was otherworldly. The way I always described it to my family and a few friends was like that of the Predator. My first work firearm was an older Smith & Wesson semi-automatic single-stack pistol that was my dad's when he worked for the Fountain Police Department. But this was the first time I felt I was defenseless while working. I watched this shimmering silhouette crawl on the asphalt over to the toll booth. After then, it appeared to stand upright and extend a long, waving arm. This looked like a being phasing between the physical and incorporeal realms. As I shifted my weight to get a closer look, as I was awestruck, the glowing reddish eyes slowly came back in focus. Then in a snap, I hear what sounds like an animal climbing up the side of the toll booth gutter, and watched as the shimmer jumped to a tree, no less than 20 feet away. From here the shimmer jumped again. This time a broken branch fell from the tree. A loud clashing sound rang from the top center of the gate, as the shimmer looked back one last time before going over the gate and disappearing into the Seven Falls Park, bringing us to today in May of 2022. My old co-worker and I ran into each other while at Walmart. We decided to go to the Gunther Totti's diner next door. While having a burger and reminiscing about the good old days, he brings up, "Did you ever see the Predator in his active camouflage at Seven Falls?" My blood ran cold, and I dropped a shade to just about pale. He then proceeded to tell me about his experience on his shifts that I'd never heard. After leaving the diner and arriving home, I sat in the driveway for a moment, contemplating what inhabits Lower Gold Camp Road.
This story I'm about to share is actually why I joined Reddit on my quest to find out if this has happened to anyone else. This is 100% true, and is really hard for me to share because anytime I have tried to tell someone else about it, I get laughed at and accused of just trying to pull their leg. I recently saw an article about a woman who was hunting and had seen an invisible or cloaked creature that she described as almost like a predator from the movie of the same name. I read her story and seen the picture she took of said predator. Now, as for her picture, I personally think it is a combination of flare from the sun and a close-up of possibly her face or something. I'm not dismissing her story though, actually quite the opposite, since I too have encountered something similar, and is what prompted me to seek out if anyone else has encountered a predator in the woods. Now, onto my encounter. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing by the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. I played there often, and my grandmother just kept an eye on me from the kitchen or living room, because the house had huge windows that faced the woods. She would come out every once in a while, just to see what I was up to. I was obsessed with digging in the dirt and collecting unusual rocks and arrowheads that littered the land where my grandmother lived. I should mention, this is Midwest Illinois, not far from Cahokia Mountains, so finding arrowheads was actually not that uncommon. Anyway, that day I remember picking out a spot to dig. I'd been there for quite a while because I remember I had a pretty decent sized hole going, when something caught my eye up in a tree that I was next to. I almost don't know how to explain it, but it looked like almost a heat wave coming off the branch of a tree. It was fall. I remember this because I had my pink jacket on and remember thinking that my mum was going to be pissed because I had dirt around the bottom of the arms from digging. I also remember there had been a lot of leaves on the ground. Anyway, I'm staring at this heat wave and realize it has a human shape. So here I am, 5 years old and wondering why there is an invisible man in the tree. I remember feeling scared but unsure what to do. Then it started moving and making a faint clicking sound. That is about the time that I decided that I was not supposed to be seeing this, and I hightailed it back to the house. My grandmother saw that I was pretty shaken, and I remember telling her that I had just seen an angel. In my 5-year-old mind, I didn't know what else it could be. I'd never heard of aliens or ghosts or monsters, so to me, it had to be an angel because that's all my little mind could think of. Fast forward to when I'm about 12 years old. By this time, the encounter was way out of my mind. I loved watching action and sci-fi movies. My dad rented a movie called Predator. I'm watching it with him, and the first time you see the Predator, invisible or cloaked in the movie, I about shit my pants. All the memories from that day, digging in the dirt, came flooding back. I even asked my dad if Predator was real, or if he knew if anyone or any animal that had cloaking abilities that I didn't know about. He told me it was all fake. It wasn't like it is today where I could just Google it. I had no access to the internet, so again, I just put it out of my mind. Again, fast forward to about the year 2004. I'm grown. I have 3 small children. I just went through a separation from my husband. I moved to the next town over, to an apartment with my kids. These apartments are all 1-level duplexes, with there being 5 buildings. I am at the very last apartment of the last building. The apartments are considered in town, but are on the outskirts. There is a deep ditch that runs behind the buildings, with a chain link fence that separates the backyard from the ditch. There are about 6 to 7 trees on our side of the fence. If you follow the ditch a little bit, you hit a small forest that eventually leads to the country, with a larger forest and farmland. I'm a smoker, but would not smoke in the apartment because of the kids, so I often went out to the back porch. One night, I was up late doing laundry and stuff after the kids went to bed. I decided to take a smoke break before I myself went to sleep. I am back there on the porch, and I started hearing this faint clicking sound. I immediately looked to the ditch because I had seen a groundhog out there a few days before, and thought perhaps he was out there again. The yard is faintly lit from the outside light that is by the playground that is to the right of my back porch. I didn't turn on my back porch light. I didn't normally if I was just going out for a quick smoke. I didn't see any groundhog or movement from the ditch, so I go back to smoking my cigarette. The faint clicking sound keeps happening, and a slight shift of movement makes me look up into the tree to the left of my porch. It's there. The same invisible thing I had seen when I was 5. It's like a distortion, and in a humanoid shape. It is crouched down on the branch with an arm out, holding onto the trunk of the tree. I couldn't believe it. I was like, is this happening? Has it come to kill me from me seeing it all those years ago? All I could think about was my kids in the apartment sleeping. I ran in and slammed the door and locked it. I ran to the kids' rooms and made sure the windows were locked. Then I just turned out the lights in the living room and stared at the blinds at the tree to see if I could catch another glimpse of it. I sat there for about a good 10 minutes and couldn't see anything. I began to think that I'm just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. Just as I was finally talking myself down, my neighbor's dog comes running across the yard and starts barking at the tree, at the same branch that I had seen this predator thing. That pretty much freaked me out, because this dog was not a barker. I actually have never heard him bark at anything, even at the groundhog that had been hanging out at the ditch. This barking went on for a few minutes, until I hear the neighbor lady who owns the dog calling back inside. The dog reluctantly turned to go back home, stopping every few feet to look back at the branch of the tree until he was out of my sight. I didn't sleep that night, and have never seen anything like it again. I don't know what to think of it. I am a grown woman. I have kids and a good career. I just want to know if anyone else has ever had an experience like this. I know what I saw, believe it or not. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this. This was a long time ago. I was a teenager. My parents were not strict, so I had a lot of freedom. I had 2 friends, and they had their own friends as well. And one of my friends' parents owned a huge part of this forest. We, my friends and their friends, went deep into the forest with a bunch of supplies and started making our own treehouse and forts. This was a big part of my childhood, building stuff with my friends, and this place became our sanctuary for a long time, where we'd spent a lot of our time away from adults. This event happened years after we built the place initially, and also after we rebuilt it because it got destroyed one time. This is a backstory for the events I'm about to recall. Me and my one friend spent the night at our sanctuary we built, which none of us have ever done before. We only hung out there, then went home. We all planned to spend the night together because it would be fun. Most of our friends weren't allowed to spend the night there though because of their parents, and the other that was allowed to go chickened out because he was afraid. So it was just me and one other person, my close friend's cousin. We weren't close at the time and fought a lot, but surprisingly we got along well that night. We spent most of the day swinging from trees, climbing them and hanging out on this tie rope swing while talking. It was a normal day. Then we laid down for some rest at around 9 p.m. About 10 minutes after laying down to bed in our sleeping bags, talking to each other under our makeshift tents, we heard rustling. I sat up and saw a very tall silhouette of something that looked to be humanish, that was also transparent. I could see right through it. I squinted and froze, and it very quickly climbed up this tall tree when I looked at it, disappearing. I was in complete disbelief and shock. I had no idea if I saw what I just saw, or if I hallucinated it. I wasn't scared in this moment, actually more perplexed. Being young and worried though, I said to my friend we should leave, and not wanting it to hear me, I got close to his ear and just said, "There's something in the woods looking at us." After I said that, I saw his facial expression turn into fear. So we got up and started walking down the path, out of the woods calmly. I didn't want to sprint because it might give chase. And also, I wasn't even sure if I saw anything. I'm just not taking chances. Very shortly after we started leaving, we both got this weird feeling of déjà vu and confusion. Like we were hit with hard drugs or something. Except we don't do drugs, and only ate food from our house. No hallucinogenic plants in our part of the country. Nothing. Everything was slow, and I felt disoriented. But we continued to walk in this direction for quite a while, stumbling in the darkness because of our mental state, and I realized we should have been out of the forest by now. I knew this was the way out. 110% it was, because I've been going in and out of this place for years, even in the dark. Yet, I didn't recognize all the trees around us. Just the path. It was like our surroundings were changing. My friend randomly yelled, "Yeah, I'm coming," as I was looking in the opposite direction from him. And I turned around and, very confused, asked him why he is saying that. He says his mum is calling his name to help lead him out of the forest. I hear nothing at all. I tell him I don't hear anything, and he looks at me like I'm insane. And as he walks off the path and into the forest, I grab his arm and pull him back because I don't want him to get lost. That's when my friend sees the transparent thing I saw earlier, sitting perched on a tree branch in the direction his mum was calling for him. And he points it out to me. Its transparency is almost like a heat wave effect. We stared at it for 10 seconds in disbelief. It looked like a transparent being, but we were trying to discern if it was something else, and we were just imagining it being alive, because there was no movement. But just then, it hunched down like it was trying to stalk or be stealthy, and it quickly climbed up the tree a little more and went to the next one, then the next one, getting closer to us. We didn't hear it at all. It was completely silent. Its silence was amplified by the fact that all the other forest creatures have now gone completely silent, which I'd only begun to realize in that moment that not a single bug or animal has made a sound since we started leaving. This is when our curiosity of if we were both tripping and were mistaking something turned to fear once we began to see it move. Once it got above us though, the only thing we heard was the crunching of the branch as its weight is put on it. Every little sound that it made is so distinct because it's so quiet and remote. We can't see it because the top of the trees is so dark. We start actually running, terrified, not walking anymore. We hear noises in the trees above us until it fades away ahead of us, as if it ran ahead, but the sound was a lot quieter than if a normal animal was running tree to tree, as if this thing was light, but it wasn't very small, so that made no sense. We still kept running forward, despite it sounding like it went ahead, and we ended up back at the place we started. Many minutes of walking, and we were back at this place after running for like 20 seconds. It's impossible. But instead of staying on the ground, we climbed to the top of the treehouse with our items as quickly as possible and closed the door, wedging a small piece of plywood in it to keep it shut. We hear something climbing up and extremely odd noises as well, like mimicking noises of rain and wind. There's no water seeping into our treehouse with cracks in it, and it wasn't wet when we left. This persisted for a minute, and we didn't hear from it again. I'm pretty sure at that point it had left, but we spent the rest of the night there until the sun came up anyways. When he checked his iPod Touch for the time, this is right after we closed the door, it was 5 a.m. We started laying on the ground at 9 p.m. 8 hours passed in less than 40 minutes of time. Hours after, we could start to see the sun through the treehouse. Then we went home. I no longer talked to this friend, but after this incident we discussed it and said everything from both our point of views. And we randomly brought it up to each other every few months and relived it, making sure we were still on the same page about what happened and what we remember. I never spent the night out there again, and I didn't even let myself stay out there past 5 p.m. for a very long time. This is my story, and I'd be willing to take a polygraph test if the opportunity ever arises.